At around 11 p.m. on August the 14th of 2020, Colorado couple Joseph and Jocelyn Roland went to the Southlands Mall in Aurora to buy a 2017 Toyota RAV4. The parents of five responded to an ad posted by 18-year-old Kyrie Brown, who'd used a pseudonym on the Let Go app. Upon meeting the Rolands, Brown claimed that he'd accidentally taken the wrong vehicle title and asked them to follow him to an apartment on East Cornell Circle, near South Parker Road. Upon reaching their destination, Brown pulled out a pistol, aimed it at 39-year-old Joseph, and demanded the cash he'd brought with him to make the car purchase. The couple were still in their vehicle when Brown opened fire. The thug shot them both in cold blood and took their money. The Rolands were found unresponsive in their vehicle, and they were rushed to a local hospital where they died within 5 minutes of each other. The car that Brown had tried to sell them had been stolen a few days prior. After fleeing the scene, he set fire to the vehicle and abandoned it. In the double murder's wake, the teen uploaded a photo to his social media, proudly displaying the cash he'd stolen from the Rolands. He also reposted an ad for the Toyota under a different pseudonym, but the police arrested him, preventing him from claiming more victims. Brown was arrested on August the 27th after a chase that ended near 29th Avenue and Central Park Boulevard in Denver. Jocelyn's grieving sister told the media, "A person that clearly didn't care about what is right or what is wrong didn't just steal money. He stole our family." The Rolands' eldest child, 17-year-old Madison, said, "My parents were and always will be the two most giving, compassionate, helpful, kind, and selfless people I've ever met. We will never get to experience anything as a family ever again." Madison had narrowly avoided becoming a victim herself. She'd initially planned to go with Joseph to buy the car, but ultimately chose to drive her boyfriend home instead. In August of 2022, Brown was convicted on multiple counts of first-degree murder, as well as aggravated robbery, aggravated motor vehicle theft, arson, and bait advertising. In early January of the following year, he was handed 2 consecutive life sentences. Number 8. Chelsey McReynolds. In the fall of 2016, Chelsey McReynolds was living with roommates Blake Wilson and Lincoln Johns at a residence in Rantoul, Illinois. In October, McReynolds placed an ad on Backpage.com offering her services as an escort. A Champagne man answered the ad and went to her Falcon Drive home, expecting to have relations with her. McReynolds and another woman met him at the door and led him to an upstairs bedroom where he was left alone. Simultaneously, Johns and Wilson were lying in wait in a second bedroom with their shirts pulled over their faces. They rushed into the room with McReynolds' client, threatened him with a gun, and demanded he surrender his cash, credit cards, phone, and keys. In spite of him complying, Wilson and Johns then started beating the man while ordering him to give them the PIN for his credit card and the code to unlock his iPhone. During the beatdown, McReynolds stole the victim's wedding band and watch upon being instructed to do so by Wilson. At some point, the victim was able to escape and run down to his truck, for which he had a spare key in the console. As he sped off, one of his attackers shot at him, hitting his vehicle. The victim, who'd been left with a severely swollen face, subsequently led the police to the home where he'd been attacked. A search produced the items which the thugs had stolen from him, as well as a .380 semi-automatic Ruger handgun, a slip of paper with the victim's PIN, and an envelope with his cell phone unlock code written on it. McReynolds, Wilson, and Johns were arrested. Updates indicated that the 23-year-old woman was sentenced to 4 years of probation after pleading guilty to robbery, while Wilson was convicted of armed robbery and given 34 years behind bars. Number 7. El Rey and June Runyon. In January of 2015, Georgia couple El Rey and June Runyon, aged 69 and 66, respectively, traveled 3 hours to Telfair County from their home in Marietta, expecting to buy a vintage car. El Rey had responded to a Craigslist ad for a 1966 Mustang. According to the couple's daughter, the vehicle would have been a nostalgic purchase for El Rey, as it was the same model he'd bought decades prior, after returning from the Vietnam War. Unfortunately, he and June never made it back home. The ad for the Mustang had been placed by Ronnie Towns, who didn't own the classic car. Upon meeting up with the Runyons, he robbed and executed them in cold blood. Law enforcement found their bullet-riddled bodies beside a county road, and Towns was arrested for armed robbery and murder a few days later. The legal proceedings would stagnate for nearly a decade. The original indictment against the accused killer was thrown out by Georgia courts over problems with jury selection. Towns was indicted once more in 2020, but further delays were caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2023, a person who was magnet fishing in Horse Creek in Telfair County uncovered new evidence that strengthened the case against Towns. It consisted of a .22 caliber rifle and a bag containing a cell phone, as well as a pair of driver's licenses and credit cards belonging to El Rey and June. In light of the discovery and renewed interest in the case, Towns pleaded guilty in Telfair County Superior Court to 2 counts of malice murder in the fall of 2024. He thus avoided going to trial and potentially receiving the death sentence. Towns was sentenced to 2 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. Number 6. Derrick Decoste. On March the 9th of 2019, a former New Jersey priest was found dead with a gunshot wound to the neck in the kitchen of his home in Henderson, Nevada. 70-year-old John Caparelli had been defrocked by the Archdiocese of Newark in 1992 after being accused of groping and molesting teenage boys in the 1970s and 1980s. During some of the abuse cases, Caparelli was reported to have asked his victims to wrestle him in tight swimwear. He later worked as a public school math teacher before surrendering his license and moving to Nevada in the 2010s. Caparelli, who was known to seek the services of male escorts, had last been seen alive on March the 6th of 2019. Around that time, he was in communication with 25-year-old Derrick Decoste. The former priest had posted a Craigslist ad seeking young and good-looking men for wrestling matches. The printed-out ad was reportedly found next to Caparelli's body. Decoste was determined to have responded to his ad and visited his home at least once. When he was interviewed by law enforcement, he claimed that he went to the address for a photography gig. His girlfriend, however, claimed that he went there to wrestle. She also provided the police with a 9mm Smith & Wesson handgun owned by Decoste. The weapon matched the cartridge found at the scene. Several items were missing from the disgraced priest's home, including his wallet, cell phone, and the watch that was subsequently found among Decoste's possessions. The man was arrested in Michigan and faced charges of murder with a deadly weapon and robbery with a deadly weapon. Caparelli's death occurred less than a month after he was listed among 188 priests and deacons identified by New Jersey's 5 Roman Catholic dioceses as abusers of minors. The reason for the killing, however, wasn't believed to have been linked to his past, and the incident was suspected to have been a robbery gone wrong. New Jersey man Rich Fitter, one of Caparelli's past victims who won a settlement from the church after revealing the abuse, reacted to the news of his death with impassibility, pointing out that it was karma. Fitter told a media outlet, "I don't want to sound cold, but the world is a safer place without him. He is a serial predator, and he is a sociopath, and he is a criminal." Decoste ultimately admitted second-degree murder, and in 2023 he was sentenced to up to 45 years behind bars. Number 5. Rashan Abanathi. Shawndell Jones and Shaquille Jordan. 18-year-old San Diego Mesa College student Garrett Berkey and his girlfriend Ali Faldua went to San Diego's Paradise Hills neighborhood with the intention of buying a MacBook Pro laptop on May the 11th of 2011. The Craigslist ad had been placed under a fake name by Rashan Abanathi, Shawndell Jones and Shaquille Jordan, all of whom were in their late teens at the time. When Berkey and Faldua met them in Paradise Hills, they were held at gunpoint. The couple were robbed of their cell phones and the $600 that Berkey had brought with him to buy the laptop. The thieving trio then took off in their getaway car with Jordan behind the wheel and Jones in the front passenger seat. Berkey and Faldua were on their way to report the crime when they spotted the trio's vehicle. Berkey drove after them on State Route 54, and the pursuit culminated with both vehicles coming front to front in a cul-de-sac. At that point, Abanathi fired a shot that went through the windshield of the couple's vehicle and struck Berkey in the shoulder. He died in a hospital less than an hour later. Jordan sped away from the scene but crashed not far from the area where the shooting had occurred. The 3 thugs fled on foot but were arrested a short time later. By the spring of 2013, they were convicted of robbery and murder. The jury also found Abanathi guilty of carrying out a nearly identical robbery on May the 5th. A Navy man had responded to an ad to buy a similar computer, whereupon Abanathi held him at gunpoint and robbed him of $600. A judge said that he was actually invigorated by that crime and that he enjoyed the adrenaline rush of threatening his victims with a gun. Also pointed out in court was the fact that Abanathi came from a stable household with a large and supportive family, and that he committed the crimes out of pure greed. Abanathi was sentenced to 50 years behind bars, while Jordan and Jones were each handed sentences of 25 to life. Number 4. Michael LaPreta. 19-year-old Michael Lopretta responded to a cash-for-car ad on OfferUp and went to meet the seller in Fairfield, California on November the 4th of 2021. As reported by his family, Lopretta had a passion for flipping cars, and he didn't have any suspicions regarding the planned transaction. However, upon arriving on Tyler Street, the teen was gunned down in what the authorities later determined was a robbery gone wrong. Lopretta was found by a resident who called 911 and who reportedly prayed over him until the arrival of law enforcement. When officers found him, Lopretta was not breathing and had blood coming from his mouth. His gunshot wounds proved fatal. 24-year-old San Pablo woman Jacaria Stringer was arrested on first-degree murder charges the following day. But the authorities didn't release further details about the incident. As of the latest updates on the case, Stringer pleaded not guilty and her trial date was pending. Number 3. Michael Gordon. In April of 2015, teenager Taylor Clark posted an ad on Craigslist selling his red 2007 Nissan 350Z for $11,000. Clark, a sophomore at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville, wrote in the ad, "No joyrides. It is a fun car and will be great for anyone who is looking for a fun car to drive." On May the 4th, he briefly met up with his girlfriend before heading to Hazelwood, Missouri, to talk with a prospective buyer for the Nissan. 19-year-old Clark was reported missing when he failed to return from the rendezvous. His cell phone last registered a ping at 11:37 a.m. near the St. Louis Outlet Mall. The Nissan was found in the parking lot of the MTC Truck Driver Training School in Hazelwood, which was 40 minutes from Clark's home in St. Jacob. Clark's body was located roughly 400 yards from his vehicle, buried in a shallow grave in a wooded area. The young man died after being shot in the head. The prime suspect in the murder was identified as 24-year-old Michael Gordon, and he was arrested days after the body's discovery. He was determined to have contacted Clark, expressing an interest in the Nissan, and they exchanged emails discussing the purchase. Gordon worked at the MTC Truck Driver Training School, and he was suspected to have lured the victim to a secluded area of Hazelwood while on his lunch break. Once out of the public's view, he shot Clark in the face. Evidence indicated that Gordon had bought a gun, bleach, and a shovel used in the murder days before meeting the victim. Prosecutors suspected that Gordon had killed the teen for his car to replace his own nearly identical red Nissan 350Z, which had been repossessed. Gordon was found guilty of first-degree murder in October of 2017. He was sentenced to life without parole for murder and given an additional life sentence for armed criminal action. Number 2. Katherine Ann Olson. 24-year-old Katherine Ann Olson went to her home in Savage, Minnesota on October the 25th of 2007 after answering a Craigslist ad for nanny services. She'd exchanged emails with a person whom she believed was a married woman named Amy. In reality, the ad had been placed by 19-year-old Michael John Anderson. He arranged for Olson to have an in-person interview at his parents' home. Shortly after the young woman's arrival, Anderson fatally shot her in the back with a .357 Magnum pistol. He placed her body in the trunk of her car and abandoned it at the Burnsville Nature Preserve, where it was discovered the following day. In disposing of evidence linking him to the murder, Anderson crushed Olson's phone and wrapped it in a bloody towel, which he forgot had his name written on it in magic marker. The online exchanges with Olson were traced back to Anderson, and he was arrested for her murder. He became the first person to be given the Craigslist killer moniker by the media. During the trial that followed, the judge didn't allow his defense to discuss Anderson's Asperger's syndrome in court. The disorder, characterized by significant difficulties with social interaction, was regarded by Anderson's representative as a major contributor to the crime. A judge, however, felt that there was no proof of it playing a concrete role in Olson's murder, and that presented it as such might invite a jury to speculate about diminished capacity, which was not recognized in Minnesota. The defense instead depicted Anderson as a bizarre kid with no social skills who lived in an unreal world. The argument they put forward was that when Olson tried to leave, Anderson fell back on his video game experience and pulled his father's gun on her. The defense proposed that he then accidentally shot her when he flinched or tripped. Prosecutors claimed that Anderson had lured the victim to the home because he wanted to experience what it felt like to kill. Olson's father stated in the court he needs to be prevented from inflicting evil on anybody else's life ever again. The man, a Lutheran pastor, said that he believed God would help him forgive Anderson, but added, in this situation, I don't sense that there is any hurry. The prosecution's arguments prevailed. Anderson was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, and on April the 1st of 2009, he was sentenced to life without parole. Stick around after number 1 if you have not yet seen our long release about when having a lapse of judgment goes wrong. That one will keep you entertained for a while longer. Number 1. Michelle Wilkins. On March the 18th of 2015, Michelle Wilkins responded to an online ad for maternity and baby clothes posted by 35-year-old Dianne Lane and went to her home in Longmont, Colorado. 26-year-old Wilkins was 7 months pregnant with a girl she'd named Aurora. At some point during the rendezvous, Lane viciously attacked the mother-to-be. She repeatedly beat and stabbed her. Lane was a former nurse's aide, and she knew exactly what she was doing when she cut into Wilkins' uterus. She ripped out Aurora, killing her in the process. Wilkins was left clinging to life and abandoned in the basement. It would emerge that for months, Lane had been pretending to be pregnant and had managed to convince her partner that he would be a father. When the man came home early on March the 18th, he found her covered in blood. While holding Aurora's lifeless body, Lane claimed that she'd suffered a miscarriage. The man rushed her to Longmont United Hospital. Fully unaware that Wilkins was on the verge of death in the basement, Wilkins was able to call 911. During the 6-minute call, she told the operator, "She cut me in the stomach. I'm pregnant. I'm bleeding out." The young woman went on to say that she didn't know the assailant and that she'd gone to her home after answering an ad. The dispatcher urged her, "You stay with me. Don't go to sleep." Law enforcement rushed to the address and found Wilkins faintly calling for help. She was taken to the same hospital as Lane and survived after receiving surgery. Following her arrest, Lane told the police that she'd acted in self-defense. She claimed that Wilkins had attacked her inside the home and that upon fighting back, she'd injured the other woman so severely that she thought she was going to die. In her version of events, Lane said that she cut Aurora from her mother's womb in an attempt to save her. The self-defense claim would ultimately hold little weight when contrasted by her pregnancy lies, the reports of her partner, and Wilkins' own testimony. Prosecutors were unable to charge Lane with murdering the unborn girl because a coroner found no evidence that it had lived. Colorado state law doesn't recognize a fetus as a person unless it was capable of surviving for a period of time outside the womb. During the trial that followed, Lane didn't speak in her own defense and expressed no remorse for her crimes. Evidence indicated that the woman, who was the mother of 2 teenage daughters, had never recovered from the accidental drowning death of her young son in 2002. She was reportedly desperate to have another child. Addressing her in court, Wilkins said, "You knowingly left me to die multiple times," added, "You embrace your narcissistic fantasy to fulfill the lie you created, and it was more important than my right to live and Aurora's right to live." In February of 2016, Lane was found guilty of attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of first-degree assault, 2 counts of second-degree assault, and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. In April, she was sentenced to 100 years in prison. The verdict echoed Wilkins' court statement to Lane, in which she said, "I believe you should receive the maximum penalty because I believe that you have lost the privilege to live in our society." On New Year's Day 2010, Ohio woman Melodi Dushane was taken into custody by Toledo law enforcement following her violent outburst at the drive-thru of a McDonald's restaurant. The 25-year-old became enraged when she was told that she couldn't order chicken McNuggets because the restaurant was still serving breakfast. What followed was captured by CCTV and received considerable media attention in the aftermath. Dushane, who was intoxicated at the time, reached through the drive-thru window and punched 2 workers in succession. The employees initially struggled to slide the window and keep Dushane out, but as the scuffle progressed, a manager seemingly tried to pull her inside by her hair. Before speeding off, the young woman grabbed a bottle from her car and hurled it at the glass window, shattering it. The McNuggets-related outburst resulted in Dushane's arrest for felony vandalism. A few months after the incident, she was sentenced to 60 days in jail and also had to pay McDonald's back for the broken window. Number 8. Travis Treader. In the spring of 2016, Florida man Travis Treader entered the Animal House Pet Center in St. Augustine and asked about the reptiles that the store had for sale. While the employees were distracted, Treader went to a glass enclosure, took out a baby python, and put it in the front pocket of his pants. The store's owner, Steve Silk, suspected the man of having stolen reptiles from him several times in the past months, with the purpose of selling them on Craigslist. The python he'd most recently targeted was valued at nearly $150. The owner and staff went into the office and watched on the security monitors as the theft was unfolding. A worker then tried to stop Treader from exiting the store as he still had the snake in his hands. Treader pushed him out of his way and fled, but another customer, who was an off-duty security guard, prevented him from leaving. Staff and customers took Treader down and secured his hands with cable ties before calling 911. Law enforcement arrived at the scene and arrested him for petty theft and resisting a merchant. Number 7. Heather Underwood. English OnlyFans model Heather Underwood was arrested on an 8-year-old warrant and taken to a station in Stoke-on-Trent in the summer of 2022. Underwood later described the circumstances of her arrest by reporting that she'd woken up one morning to a knock on her door and answered it to find a police officer. They asked if Underwood knew that she was wanted, which she did not. The 32-year-old was arrested. Her shoes and phone were taken off her and she was searched prior to being placed in a cell. Underwood called the entire process degrading, noting the lack of privacy she experienced when she had to use the restroom while in custody, and it only had a glass window. Back when she was living on Leek Road years prior, she'd put her rubbish in black bags, and because the previous tenants had filled the bins, Underwood had simply left her bags next to the bins. The model was then sent a letter by the city council explaining that they'd cleaned up the rubbish because the bags had been ripped open overnight. As per Underwood's account, it was the only interaction she'd had with officials up until the officer coming to her door. She'd learned that a warrant in her name had been active for 8 years for fly tipping, as well as for failure to answer to court, and she was thus taken into custody. The case was thrown out and Underwood was allowed to return home that afternoon. She noted the discrepancy in her arrest for trash bags after such a long period of time, and the fact that she'd called the police 2 weeks prior after spotting a boy armed with a machete, but no officers were sent. Underwood also told a media outlet that OnlyFans was a full-time job, not a quick buck opportunity, and that the arrest had caused her to miss a day of work that she believed would have amounted up to $250. Number 6. Edna Jester. In October of 2008, Edna Jester, an Ohio woman in her late 80s, refused to return a football belonging to her neighbor's children after it had landed in her yard. Consequently, Jester was arrested on charges of petty theft and briefly taken to jail. In December, she filed a lawsuit against the children's parents, Paul and Kelly Tannis, seeking unspecified monetary damages for emotional distress. Jester, who lived in the Cincinnati suburb of Blue Ash, claimed that she'd been affected by playthings belonging to her next-door neighbor's children constantly finding their way in her yard. Kelly, a mother of 5, described the lawsuit as very silly, but also noted that she and her husband were worried because they couldn't afford an attorney. The petty theft charge against the senior citizen was eventually dropped by prosecutors, and she chose to abandon her lawsuit in March of 2009. Number 5. Mark Welch. A Florida teenager called 911 in the fall of 2012 to report that his dreams were happening in reality and that his family didn't believe him. When asked about his dreams, 18-year-old Mark Welch told a dispatcher, "It's all on paper, I wrote it down." Volusia County deputies were sent to his home where the teen confessed to smoking K2, a form of synthetic marijuana. While it became apparent that he was suffering from the effects of the drug, Welch wasn't considered to be in need of medical assistance. Before leaving the address, a deputy told him that he'd be arrested if he called 911 again. His family hid their phone from Welch, but roughly 40 minutes after the first call, he went to a neighbor's house and dialed the emergency number once more. He seemed aware that it would result in him being arrested during his conversation with the dispatcher. Welch asked for a deputy to be sent back to his home, and when questioned about why he wanted to go to jail, said, "I have to prove something to my family." The same deputy that had warned him after the first call took the teen into custody for misuse of the 911 system, a first-degree misdemeanor. He was booked into the Volusia County Branch Jail on a $500 bond. Number 4. David Smith. A Florida man was arrested for rubbing up against a stop sign in April of 2016 in what the police in St. Petersburg described as its most bizarre case to date. For several days, 58-year-old David Smith had been stalking his ex. Between April the 10th and the 13th, he'd walked on foot to the woman's address at night and dumped trash on her property before leaving the area. The incidents were recorded on the victim's surveillance cameras, and the latest trash dump had also been seen by an officer. Earlier in the day on April the 13th, a witness had spotted Smith simulating intercourse with a stop sign in front of the woman's residence while pointing at her house and laughing. It wasn't made immediately clear if his actions were meant as a form of revenge or a twisted and ill-advised attempt at getting the woman back. As a result, of his disturbing behavior, Smith was arrested on stalking charges. Number 3. Petr Dusek. A 29-year-old Florida man was arrested on May the 20th of 2022 for blowing up the mailbox of a Merritt Island resident over a landscaping payment dispute. 29-year-old Petr Dusek, who reportedly managed lawn care for the neighborhood, had gone to a First Street address to collect payment for services he'd provided for a previous homeowner. The man in question had told Dusek to meet him at the residence on Friday at 2 p.m., but the landscaper showed up on Thursday. He talked to the man's mother, who reiterated that her son wasn't home. Dusek returned to his SUV and started driving down the road before he turned back and left something in the mailbox. It exploded minutes later, bending a street sign next to it and throwing shrapnel roughly 50 feet from the blast zone. No one was hurt, but debris landed only feet away from a neighbor who was outside when the explosion occurred. At the time of the incident, Dusek was already on parole for a previous sentence and was listed as a violent felony offender of special concern. The mailbox bombing was witnessed by several neighbors, and their reports were corroborated by footage from surveillance cameras. The device Dusek had used was reported as a manufactured, destructive device that was not put together hastily. He faced several charges that included discharging a destructive device, possession to destruct a device to cause bodily harm, and possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. Number 2. Carrie Harkness. On December the 18th of 2010, state troopers were called to the Country Fair Market in Meadville, Pennsylvania, where a clerk reported that a woman had entered a walk-in freezer and refused to leave. She was identified as 23-year-old Carrie Harkness, who was with an unnamed female companion. Law enforcement elicited the latter's help in getting Harkness out of the freezer, and when the clerk opened the door, the woman asked her if she'd urinated inside, to which Harkness responded affirmatively. A trooper then found what appeared to be frozen liquid on the freezer floor and also splattered on boxes containing bagels, 2 bite cakes, and packaged cookies. Harkness was arrested on a charge of misdemeanor criminal mischief, but in February of the following year, pleaded guilty to the reduced charge of disorderly conduct. She was ordered to pay a fine of nearly $250 by a Crawford County judge. Number 1. Valerie Dixon. In the fall of 2013, a Florida woman was arrested for doing what was officially reported as a vulgar dance in front of a school bus full of children. According to the Lake County Sheriff's Office, 27-year-old Valerie Dixon bent over and started dancing with one hand on her ankle and with the other grabbing her private area. The children reportedly watched the woman as she was twerking and screaming profanities at the bus. Simultaneously, Dixon, who had no fixed address at the time, was spotted by a deputy. She was arrested on a charge of disorderly conduct and booked into Lake County Jail on a $250 bond. A 24-year-old police officer from DeKalb County, Georgia, was arrested and criminally charged for posting nude photos of a colleague on social media. The situation came to light following the release of a police report in January of 2017. The officer in question was identified as Audrey Francisquini, who was described as an acquaintance of the unnamed victim. Investigators said the latter was notified of the explicit images publication by concerned friends. The motive for Francisquini's actions was unclear, as she, as the victim, reportedly had friendly interactions as recently as a few days before the photos were posted. It's believed that the young officer hacked her colleagues' social media accounts to gain access to the pictures on her phone. After uploading the materials for the public to see, Francisquini sent the victim threatening messages, allegedly saying, "You're going to learn." As a consequence, she was taken into police custody on charges of invasion of privacy by computer trespassing, and explicit transmissions. Although she was placed on administrative leave at the onset of the investigation, Francisquini was eventually terminated from the force, after which she moved to Florida. The young woman resurfaced in national headlines in May of 2021 when she was accused of sneaking into a Hialeah high school and passing out flyers bearing her Instagram handle to students. The bizarre incident, which landed the 28-year-old back in custody, had apparently been hatched as a ploy for her to grow her social media following. Number 24. James Matt French. Early on the morning of March the 12th of 2023, Oklahoma City police observed an SUV speeding and swerving along South May Avenue. An officer caught up with the vehicle after it pulled into a private driveway on Southwest Grand Boulevard. In body cam footage from the traffic stop, the motorist, identified as James Matt French, was asked if he'd been drinking. He neglected to answer the question, instead asserting, "I'm a captain on the police department." Subsequent reports confirmed French's claim, mentioning that he worked as part of the OKCPD's Investigations Bureau. When asked again if he'd been drinking that night, the man hesitated before motioning towards his chest and asking the officer to turn off his body cam in a whispering tone of voice. The officer declined, stating, "I'm not turning my camera off. You've got to be kidding me." French eventually stepped out of his unmarked, city-owned SUV and admitted to drinking 3 or 4 beers during a poker game that evening. The officer then asked the inebriated police captain if he thought he should be driving in his impaired state. French said, "No, but I came from 4 blocks." After failing field sobriety tests, French continued pleading with the officer to turn off his body camera again, reiterating that he was a captain with the police department. The officer rejected him time and again, eventually saying, "I'm a sergeant. I've taken an oath to uphold the law. I don't care if you're a gangbanger or the President of the United States." The captain was ultimately taken into custody and booked at the Oklahoma County Detention Center on a DUI. 55-year-old French, who'd been with the department for 32 years, was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into his actions. Number 23. Christopher Lofton. In the aftermath of the horrific Robb Elementary School shooting in May of 2022, the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office in Texas dispatched a team of 8 patrol deputies and 2 dispatchers to the city of Uvalde in order to assist local agencies. One of the officers assigned to the relief effort was Deputy Christopher Lofton, a 2-year veteran of the force. On June the 2nd, a few days after arriving in Uvalde, Lofton reportedly got intoxicated to the point that he was a danger to himself and others. While he was off duty at the officer's temporary living quarters, he was immediately removed from the assignment and arrested for public intoxication. Having violated multiple department policies, Lofton was promptly terminated from his position with the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office. Number 22. Emily Garcia. Shortly before 4:30 a.m. on August the 3rd of 2022, Miami police were called to the home of a South Florida cop's significant other for a report of a domestic disturbance. El Portal Police Corporal Emily Garcia and her boyfriend, who was also identified as a police officer, had returned home from a night out at a Flanagan's Seafood Bar and Grill, where they drank multiple alcoholic beverages. They'd subsequently gone to sleep, but the unnamed boyfriend later awoke to find Garcia slapping him and biting his chest. He shoved her away, causing her upper lip to bruise. After law enforcement arrived, Garcia was taken into custody on a charge of simple battery. El Portal's police chief verified in the aftermath that the incident took place while the corporal was off duty. She was consequently relieved of her police powers with pay pending an official investigation. Garcia's boyfriend told a judge that he wasn't afraid of her and didn't wish for her to be issued a stay-away order. A modified order was ultimately imposed, allowing Garcia to have contact with her partner as long as she wasn't physically threatening. The terms of the order also stipulated that she could not engage in criminal activity or possess a firearm. Number 21. Brian R. Taha. Early on August the 24th of 2021, a pair of uniformed police officers were parked in the lot located at 501 South Pinellas Avenue in Tarpon Springs, Florida. Shortly after 1 a.m., a vehicle pulled into the parking lot and came to a halt near one of the officers. The driver, identified as 37-year-old Brian R. Taha, was acting strangely and made what were described as unusual and erratic statements. One of the officers at the scene later reported hearing what he believed to be a semi-automatic handgun slide being manipulated. When confronted, Taha voluntarily exited his vehicle to speak with the policeman, who subsequently confirmed that a handgun was inside the car and that a magazine had been removed. It emerged during their conversation with Taha that he was an off-duty Clearwater police officer. A patrol supervisor was called to the scene, whereupon it was determined that the man was under the influence of alcohol. At some point, Taha allegedly became aggressive towards the officers, but was ultimately arrested without the use of force. He was reportedly taken to the Pinellas County Jail and booked on a DUI. Number 20. Courtney Brown and Christy Wilson. Georgia woman Sarah Webb was late for her job at a nail salon when she was pulled over in the city of Roswell for allegedly speeding on April the 7th of 2018. The officers who initiated the stop, identified as Courtney Brown and Christy Wilson, were seemingly unfazed by the presence of their body cameras and proceeded to joke around about the motorist's fate. In footage of the cops' interaction, Officer Brown could be heard admitting she didn't actually have speed detection equipment before pulling out her phone and opening a coin flip app. Officer Wilson proposed that if the virtual coin landed on heads, they'd arrest Webb, despite not having any evidence that she'd broken the law. If the coin fell tails up, the officers said they'd let her go. The coin subsequently landed on tails, but Brown and Wilson decided to make the unlawful arrest regardless, making a joke in reference to Michael Jordan and his number 23, which is the police's code for arrest. Webb was tearful as the officers placed her in handcuffs and stuffed her in the back of their squad car. A couple months then passed before Brown and Wilson's illegal coin flip arrest came to light. Webb would later reveal that she didn't know anything about the situation until a local media outlet reached out to her with the body cam footage 3 weeks before her scheduled court date. In July of 2018, the woman had her speeding charges dropped, and Roswell's police chief released a letter reprimanding the officers' actions and notifying the public of their termination. The chief said that Brown and Wilson had violated 2 of the department's human resources policies by failing to perform at an acceptable level, stating that using a coin flip to determine one's freedom was not police procedure. Number 19. Dennis Folia. A fight broke out at Spectrum Lounge on Baltimore Avenue in Beltsville, Maryland, in the early hours of May the 6th of 2022. At around 2:30 a.m., a heated dispute between 2 female patrons over a missing passport prompted the intervention of a bar security guard, later identified as Mohammed Cisse. After the latter tried to stop one of the women as she was causing damage to the lounge, her boyfriend got involved. Dennis Folia, an off-duty DC police officer, placed Cisse in a chokehold and threatened his life, pointing a firearm at his torso. Cisse indicated he couldn't breathe and subsequently began recording the altercation. In the resulting video, Folia was shown with a police badge hanging around his neck and a gun in hand as he continued berating the security guard. Prince George's County Police responded to the scene, whereupon Folia was arrested on charges of first and second degree assault, as well as use of a firearm in a violent crime. The department issued Glock he had in his possession that night reportedly had 15 bullets in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. The following week, Folia was placed on no contact status, while the DC police chief recommended he be given an indefinite suspension. Number 18. Adam Becker. In April of 2023, an officer with the Abilene Police Department in Texas was arrested for pressuring a teen to eat a THC edible while he was off duty. The suspect was identified as Adam Becker, who'd allegedly given his child's babysitter 2 pieces of chocolate containing the psychoactive substance. The unnamed teenager later told law enforcement that she felt pressured by Becker to eat one of the edibles but saved the second one. Investigators from the Texas Department of Public Safety were able to analyze the chocolate and subsequently confirmed the presence of THC. The officer reportedly turned himself into the Jones County Sheriff's Office and resigned from the force. Number 17. Christina Guess. In July of 2022, a former Florida corrections officer was arrested for running an illicit drug trafficking ring. The deputy chief of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office revealed that the suspect, Deland resident Christina Guess, had previously worked in the Florida prison system for 12 years, but was busted for a similar drug dealing operation and ended up spending roughly 6 months behind bars. Following her release, the trafficking resumed. In March of 2021, a multi-jurisdictional investigation was opened into the drug ring headed up by Guess and supplied by 26-year-old Rashad Maurice Campbell. The large-scale operation was reportedly responsible for smuggling 24 pounds of uncut methamphetamine into the U.S. from Mexico. The deputy chief indicated that those 24 uncut pounds could amount to as many as 80 to 100 pounds when diluted for distribution on the street level. A search warrant was executed at Guess's residence, where authorities seized 1.4 pounds of meth, 348 grams of cocaine, and 11 hydrocodone pills. One of the former officer's co-conspirators, 34-year-old Andrea Iliane Dunmeyer, was also taken into custody. She'd already been actively under investigation following the death of her child, who ingested a lethal dose of methamphetamine in December of 2021. Number 16. Michael Martinez. Phoenix police interviewed one of their own officers named as Michael Martinez in connection with the solicitation of an escort in October of 2022. The 30-year-old officer was arrested on the morning of the 16th, exactly 1 month after investigators said he met up with a woman he'd found on a website as well as her friend. There were messages found on Martinez's phone in which he and one of the women engaged in detailed discussions of various intimate acts. While being interviewed, the officer admitted to paying the escort $100 on the day in question before having intercourse with her friend. According to court documents, Martinez attempted to downplay the seriousness of his actions, claiming that the encounter didn't actually break any laws regarding commercial intimacy. His colleagues at the Phoenix Police Department didn't share his view of the situation. He was arrested and initially assigned to his house while an administrative investigation got underway. However, within a few days, Martinez had resigned from the department. Number 15. Angel Poncetti and Gregory Epley Jr. In October of 2016, a man accompanied by his girlfriend broke into his estranged wife's house in Aubrey, Texas, making off with several items including her marriage license, 3 birth certificates, and 4 social security cards. The suspect involved was Dallas Police Sergeant Gregory Epley Jr., who was in the midst of a contentious divorce-related dispute with his former partner, Anna. Following their separation, the woman alleged that Epley had started posting ominous, frightening messages to social media and had bought a pocket knife, which he had shipped to her home. On the night of the break-in, Epley had been aided by one of his colleagues with the Dallas Police Department, a third-year officer by the name of Angel Poncetti. Although the situation brewed without any further developments for several months, both Epley and Poncetti ultimately turned themselves into the police in April of 2017 after warrants were issued for their arrest. The latter was charged with burglary of a habitation, while Epley was also hit with a count of stalking. Number 14. Joseph Reed Copeland. On September the 6th of 2022, an officer from the Denham Springs Police Department in Louisiana was arrested in Texas on an outstanding warrant for crimes against a juvenile. 30-year-old Joseph Reed Copeland was booked into jail in Irving before being extradited to Livingston Parish to face charges of felony carnal knowledge of a juvenile and malfeasance in office. An internal investigation into Copeland was opened after the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office received a tip from a mandated reporter about an inappropriate relationship he was having with a minor. Law enforcement learned that the officer had met up with the victim in a parking lot and also communicated with them via Snapchat and Instagram. Copeland resigned from the force following the start of the investigation and subsequently traveled to Texas. When the arrest warrant was issued, he was tracked down by the Louisiana State Police Fugitive Task Force and Irving Police Department Fugitive Unit. In January of 2023, Copeland pleaded guilty to his crimes and was given a pair of suspended prison sentences. He was also placed on probation for 3 years and ordered to register as an offender for 15 years. Number 13. Joshua Charlton. An officer from the Chillicothe Police Department in Missouri was arrested by Highway Patrol in Livingston County on the night of August 26th of 2022. Law enforcement records indicated that 24-year-old Joshua Charlton had been wanted on a felony warrant in connection with an altercation involving his live-in partner. He was accused of striking the unnamed woman with a closed fist during an argument at their residence. Charlton was booked at the Grundy County Detention Center on a third-degree domestic assault charge before being released on his own recognizance. The officer was ordered not to have any contact with the victim nor possess firearms while the case was pending. Records from the University of Central Missouri website show that Charlton had been among 25 graduates from the Central Missouri Police Academy at Warrensburg in June of 2021. Number 12. Marisela Cabello. At around 1:30 a.m. on August the 20th of 2021, the North Carolina State Highway Patrol initiated a traffic stop near downtown Raleigh at the intersection of Peace Street and Capitol Boulevard. The car that was pulled over was reportedly being operated by Marisela Cabello, an officer with the Wilson Police Department. The 26-year-old was at the time off duty and driving her personal vehicle. Law enforcement determined that Cabello was intoxicated and consequently arrested her on a DWI charge. A Wilson news release revealed that the young woman had been a police officer for about a year and was assigned to the patrol division when her arrest occurred. She was placed on administrative leave while the matter was investigated. Number 11. Dianne Ferreira. First responders in St. Cloud, Florida, were dispatched to the home of a man who died following a medical emergency on April the 3rd of 2023. As paramedics were assessing the man, a police officer who'd responded to the scene got a hold of his credit card. 25-year-old Dianne Ferreira reportedly took pictures of the card and entered the information into a mobile application with the intention of using it remotely, which she began doing the following day. Ferreira charged about $450 to the deceased man's card, all on her days off. The money was used for expenses like gas and food, but also to book a room at a hotel and purchase eyelash extensions. She attempted to charge the card twice after it had already been cancelled by the man's widow, who reported the card's suspicious activity to the authorities. After an investigation was launched, Ferreira admitted to her misdeeds and was immediately placed on unpaid administrative leave. She subsequently resigned from her position with the St. Cloud Police Department, which she'd held for about 11 months. In early May of 2023, the former officer was arrested and brought into custody with her own handcuffs. She was charged with theft of credit card information with intent to use and fraudulent use of a credit card over $200, both felonies, as well as a count of use of personal ID of a deceased person. Number 10. Jacaria Stringer. 25-year-old Jacaria Stringer didn't show up for her job as an officer with the Delray Beach Police Department in Florida for 21 days between March of 2020 and August of 2021, each time claiming she was on military leave. Stringer reportedly earned $6,553.44 in wages during the course of her 3 weeks of leave. However, as internal investigators uncovered in March of 2022, the young officer hadn't actually attended military training on any of the days she was absent in that period. Detectives interviewed Stringer's Army Reserve platoon sergeant, who said she'd been issued multiple developmental counseling forms indicating she hadn't attended battle assembly or annual training on the days in question. For each of her absences, the young woman had either claimed to be sick or neglected to provide an excuse at all. Her repeated truancy ultimately led to her undergoing involuntary separation from the U.S. Army Reserve. Stringer falsified timesheets with the police department to uphold the deception that she was with her reserve unit. When her lies came to light, a warrant was issued for her arrest. She turned herself into the Palm Beach County Jail on charges of official misconduct and grand theft. Number 9. Cristian Gallegos. The police in Little Rock, Arkansas were called to a home in the 6500 block of Brookview Drive during the early morning hours of September the 25th of 2022. Responding officers encountered one of their own, 29-year-old Cristian Gallegos, who'd been on the force for 3 years. Gallegos was allegedly involved in a violent altercation with his domestic partner, which led to him being arrested on a charge of third-degree domestic battery. Family members told law enforcement that the man had struck the female victim during the incident. Gallegos underwent a line of questioning at the police department's Major Crimes Division before being booked at the Pulaski County Detention Center. As of the most recent updates, the situation was still being investigated by the Little Rock Police Department's Professional Standards Division. In the meantime, Gallegos was relieved of duty. Number 8. Zachary Wester. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement began investigating a Jackson County Sheriff's deputy during the summer of 2018. The Internal Affairs probe was launched at the behest of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office itself, after allegations emerged regarding misconduct by Deputy Zachary Wester, at the time in his mid-20s. FDLE officials learned that between 2016 and 2018, Wester had routinely pulled motorists over for minor traffic infractions, only to plant illegal substances inside their vehicles and arrest them on phony drug charges. Internal investigators reportedly logged over 1,400 working hours on the case, during which more than 100 cases involving Wester were analyzed. 42 items of drug paraphernalia were found in the officer's patrol car, including 10 separately packaged quantities of methamphetamine and 5 separate quantities of marijuana. In body cam footage of the traffic stops Wester conducted, he was shown with what appeared to be baggies of the illegal substances in the moments before he conducted searches of the motorist vehicles. As a result of the investigation, prosecutors dropped nearly 120 criminal cases involving suspects arrested by Wester. The latter was suspended following his arrest on charges of racketeering, official misconduct, fabricating evidence, perjury, false imprisonment, and possession of controlled substances and drug paraphernalia. During the resulting court proceedings, the prosecution requested that the disgraced cop be given a prison sentence of 15 years for his crimes. Conversely, Wester's friends and family provided an impassioned defense on his behalf. The man's wife pleaded with the judge for leniency, portraying her husband as a kind, church-going individual with a strong volunteer presence in the community. The court received over 50 letters from Wester's supporters, but in the end, Circuit Judge James Goodman handed down a 12.5-year prison term. In October of 2022, the situation garnered renewed public interest after 33 people who'd been victimized by Wester's traffic stop schemes reached a settlement in their federal lawsuits against the former North Florida cop. Number 7. Roger Golubski. In September of 2022, 69-year-old Roger Golubski, a former detective with the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department, faced legal repercussions for assaults he committed 2 decades earlier when he was still on the force. As detailed in court records, Golubski was indicted on 6 federal counts of deprivation of civil rights. The charges stemmed from an investigation into heinous accusations made against the former cop during court proceedings for a man he allegedly framed for murder. In 2017, Lamont McIntyre was liberated after spending 23 years in prison for a double homicide he didn't commit. McIntyre contended that Golubski had framed him allegedly on behalf of drug dealers who paid him off. The wrongfully convicted man was ultimately awarded a settlement of $12.5 million, but Golubski's legal troubles were only just beginning. One of the women deposed in the McIntyre case, Ophelia Williams, accused the former detective of repeatedly assaulting her over the course of several months. In 1999, another woman involved in the deposition, identified only by the initials SK, alleged that she too had experienced prolonged abuse at the hands of Golubski, starting when she was a teenager and continuing for 4 years thereafter. SK testified that when she was still a teen, she'd been found unconscious near a school bathroom after losing too much blood. It subsequently emerged that she'd miscarried, and Golubski, she contended, was the only one who could have gotten her pregnant. Federal law enforcement went to Golubski's Edwardsville home to arrest him on September the 15th of 2022. As of the latest developments, the investigation was still ongoing. Number 6. Julie Stunker. In November of 2021, Officer Julie Stunker of the Aurora Police Department in Colorado was involved in a physical altercation with her estranged partner at their home in Denver. The couple had reportedly been in the midst of divorce proceedings when the incident occurred. In the aftermath, Stunker, a 20-year-old police veteran, was charged with assault and disturbing the peace. Within a matter of days, she found herself back in handcuffs after she returned to the home to retrieve her pickup truck without notifying her colleagues. A restraining order had been put in place following the initial domestic episode, stipulating that other law enforcement officials needed to be present for Stunker to go back to the residence. Although her domestic violence charges were eventually dismissed, the case involving the restraining order violation was brought to trial in November of 2022. Stringer was found guilty and consequently sentenced to a year of supervised probation. She was also ordered to undergo domestic violence evaluation and treatment and was subject to a protection order that prohibited her from possessing, purchasing, or controlling a firearm. Stringer had been placed on administrative leave for 10 months following her arrest before working in a non-enforcement role within the department. The new position saw the veteran officer stripped of her police powers and completely kept away from contact with the public. After she was convicted of the restraining order violation, she was issued a letter from Aurora's police chief notifying her of her impending termination. Before she was fired, however, Stringer resigned in May of 2023. Number 5. Kwaku Riley Agyapong. Only hours into the 2023 new year, a brutal altercation unfolded at a home in Burlington Avenue in Gaston County, North Carolina. According to a press release from the town of Ranlo, a police officer by the name of Kwaku Riley Agyapong had sustained multiple stab wounds during a fight fueled by a domestic dispute with 33-year-old Juan Knightley Avalo. The latter was fatally shot by the off-duty officer. The investigation into the incident was ultimately taken over by Gaston County Police, who obtained a warrant for 34-year-old Agyapong's arrest. He was held under observation at Carolmont Health in Gastonia before being booked into the Gaston County Jail on murder charges. Agyapong was subsequently terminated from the Ranlo Police Department. According to the local press, he'd previously worked for the Gastonia Police Department from October of 2019 to April of 2022 when he resigned. As North Carolina's State Bureau of Investigation continued to look into the matter, more and more details began to emerge about the players involved. Weeks prior to the shooting, Agyapong had gone to the victim's residence on a domestic call. Avalo later found out that the officer had started texting his wife. An argument erupted over the phone before Agyapong drove to the home and the deadly altercation ensued. Transcripts of the 911 calls made after the incident revealed that Avalo's wife had notified authorities of her husband's shooting. Meanwhile, Agyapong also dialed 911 but neglected to disclose that he'd just discharged his service weapon 5 times, only mentioning that he'd been stabbed. The man was transferred to the Cleveland County Jail for his own safety as he awaited his trial. Number 4. Christopher Pellant. Indiana man Christopher Pellant showed up at the Switzerland County Dispatch Center for work on the evening of July the 21st of 2022. The 39-year-old had just been sworn in as a member of the Vevey Police Department 1 month prior. On the day in question, several of Pellant's co-workers noticed he smelled like alcohol. A sheriff's deputy eventually approached the man's shift partner to ask whether he noticed anything strange about his behavior. Pellant's partner said he hadn't detected the smell of alcohol as others had, but did state that the newly minted officer's eyes were glassy. Vevey Police Chief David Wolf was subsequently notified of the situation. An investigation was launched, during which Pellant, who was on duty and in full uniform with his marked police car at the time, was asked to take a portable breathalyzer test. He reportedly blew .084, which ever so slightly exceeds the state's driving limit. Pellant told Chief Wolf that he downed 5 shots of Fireball whiskey the night before, but hadn't had any alcohol since past midnight. Nevertheless, he was immediately arrested by sheriff's deputies and fired from his job. After being booked at the Switzerland County Jail, Pellant faced charges of operating while intoxicated and official misconduct, a felony. Number 3. Zachary Tyler Bowen. At about 6:30 p.m. on March the 17th of 2019, a male motorist changed lanes while traveling along the outer loop of Interstate 695 in northern Maryland with a female passenger. After doing so, a Volkswagen Jetta pulled up alongside their car and the driver, believing he'd been cut off, pointed a handgun in their direction. The man and woman subsequently called 911 to report the road rage incident. They managed to provide enough of a description of the Jetta's driver for authorities to identify him as 28-year-old Tyler Bowen, a Maryland state trooper who was off duty at the time. Officers were sent to Bowen's residence in Reisterstown, where he was placed under arrest. He reportedly faced 2 counts of first-degree assault, 2 counts of second-degree assault and the use of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime or felony. Following his arrest, Bowen was immediately suspended without pay by the Maryland State Police. In subsequent reports, it was detailed how Bowen had been a sworn member of the department since January of 2012 and had most recently been working as part of the Automotive Safety Enforcement Division. Number 2. Darius Jared Morris. Authorities in Shreveport, Louisiana, received reports of a shooting in the 9100 block of Bushnell Lane on the morning of February the 19th of 2020. Officers responded to the scene at around 5 a.m., whereupon they found 27-year-old Reginald Jones suffering from a non-life-threatening gunshot wound to the leg. He was taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. Roughly 5 hours later, law enforcement took a suspect into custody, namely Darius Jared Morris, a Shreveport patrol officer. Investigators gathered that Morris and Jones had been embroiled in a dispute regarding a woman, which had led to the shooting. On the morning of the incident, the two men had argued at the Bushnell Lane address before Morris allegedly went home. The off-duty officer subsequently returned with a gun and texted Jones to come outside. As the latter, who was unarmed, approached Morris, he was shot in the leg, at which point the suspect fled. Officer Morris was consequently charged with attempted murder in the second degree. Records from the Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office indicated that he was released from custody in January of 2021, but no further updates were provided at that time. Number 1. Daniel Holtzclaw. In the early morning hours of June the 18th of 2014, Officer Daniel Holtzclaw from the Oklahoma City Police Department initiated a traffic stop on the city's northeast side. The driver, 57-year-old Janie Ligons, would later testify that Holtzclaw assaulted her, forcing her to lift up her shirt, pull down her pants, and perform intimate acts on him. Ligons, who said she feared for her life during the course of the attack, pleaded with the policeman to let her go, and when he finally did, she promptly filed a police report. As it would later emerge, Holtzclaw hadn't even been on duty at the time, having been on his way home after a completed shift when he encountered Ligons on the road. He didn't report the stop to dispatch and neglected to run a records check per police procedure. Holtzclaw reported to the OKCPD's Spring Lake Division the following day. During his shift, he was pulled aside by detectives Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory, who brought him into an interrogation room for a line of questioning. What ensued was a 2-hour inquisition in which Holtzclaw adamantly denied Ligons' accusations against him. The detectives took cheek swabs for DNA comparison and informed the officer that they believed he was being untruthful. He was placed on paid administrative leave pending further developments. After 2 months of investigation, a dozen additional complainants came forward with accusations of abuse against Holtzclaw, who was arrested on August the 21st of 2014. In the end, he faced 36 counts of abuse charges stemming from repeated assaults against primarily poor and African-American women with criminal records. Between December of 2013 and June of 2014, Holtzclaw would run background checks on women with outstanding warrants, then methodically target them with traffic stops in which he'd accost them. Ligons' assault deviated from his modus operandi, as she'd simply been passing through the impoverished area he usually targeted. The man pleaded not guilty to each of the charges levied against him, but was ultimately convicted of 18 of them. In January of 2016, he was punished for his crimes with a prison sentence of 263 years. Number 9. Penelope Soto.
Come back again. Come back again. Bring him back again.
What's up?
I believe I heard you saying to...
Yes, I did. I'm not going to the...
I believe you... Did you say...
Yes,
me?
actually, I
Did you say that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Oh, you did say that?
I'm not
I find you in
gonna lie.
direct criminal contempt. 30 days in the county jail.
In early February of 2013, teenager Penelope Soto was brought before a judge in Miami-Dade County, Florida, after she'd been arrested for Xanax possession. Soto smiled laughed and stroked her hair throughout the proceedings as she discussed the offense with Judge Jorge Rodriguez Chomat in a video-recorded hearing. For the purpose of setting the 18-year-old's bond, the judge asked her about the value of her jewelry and other assets. She replied that her jewelry was worth Rick Ross money, a reference to the South Florida rapper, which the judge didn't seem to understand. Rodriguez Chomat urged her to take the matter seriously, telling her, "We are not in a club." The judge set her bond at $5,000, telling her bye-bye, to which Soto laughed and replied, "Adios." Annoyed by her attitude, Rodriguez Chomat called her back and raised the bond to $10,000, prompting a gasping reaction from 18-year-old Soto, who asked him if he was serious. He responded affirmatively and reported with her previous "adios," prompting laughter to erupt in the courtroom. As Soto walked away, she gave the judge the middle finger and cursed at him. Rodriguez Chomat called her back once more and sentenced her to 30 days in jail for contempt of court. The clip of their interaction subsequently went viral. Soto tearfully apologized to the judge a few days later, describing her behavior as very irrational. She also admitted to having taken 2 Xanax on the day of her arrest. The judge dropped the contempt sentence, taking into account Soto's apology, her first-time offender status, her admission to Xanax abuse, and her willingness to overcome her addiction by attending a drug treatment program. Number 8. Tia Ann Olson. On December the 16th of 2014, Oklahoma woman Tia Ann Olson was reportedly making a scene at the Oklahoma County Court Clerk's office. As witnesses later told the police, 25-year-old Olson had been yelling, swearing, and gesturing to employees. She had her 2-year-old son in tow and had placed him on a counter as the scene unfolded. When deputies arrived at the scene, Olson became confrontational and refused to leave the premises. While speaking to law enforcement, she turned to her child and said, "That's right, son. Be a man and kill the police." The boy reportedly fell from the counter moments later but was caught by one of the officers. Olson was arrested on complaints of assault and battery on an officer, obstructing an officer, and disturbing the peace. Her son was consequently placed in protective custody with the Oklahoma Department of Human Services. Number 7. Timothy Knowlton and Joshua Fitzpatrick. On July the 13th of 2022, 2 men were arrested following a brutal melee outside a restaurant in Dumfries, in Prince William County, Virginia. The incident had started as a dispute between an unidentified employee and patrons. The former called his associate, 33-year-old Joshua Fitzpatrick, to support him in the conflict. He confronted the customers, and as the dispute escalated, one of them, identified as 38-year-old Timothy Knowlton, brandished a machete. He struck Fitzpatrick with it before a separate fight broke out in the parking lot. It involved the employee who'd called for Fitzpatrick and an unnamed 38-year-old woman who'd accompanied Knowlton. During the second altercation, Fitzpatrick retrieved a hammer and hit the woman with it before the parties separated, and the police arrived at the scene. Only minor injuries were reported in the armed brawl. Knowlton and Fitzpatrick were arrested in the aftermath, with the former being charged with malicious wounding and the latter with unlawful wounding. Number 6. Mark Spiridakos. In the summer of 2014, American director Woody Allen was filming in Providence, Rhode Island for his upcoming crime mystery drama, Irrational Man. The director wasn't actually on set in early August when a Greek man, Mark Spiridakos, caused the scene that required the intervention of local law enforcement. As reported by the set's security guards, he approached the location and started asking weird questions about Allen and the movie's leading actors, Joaquin Phoenix and Emma Stone. He demanded to know where they were before grabbing a guard. He then threw a metal chair and an ice cooler at the security staff and had to be wrestled to the ground. Spiridakos suffered a head injury in the scuffle before he broke free and ran into a nearby hair salon. Employees and clients were stunned and confused upon seeing the blood-covered man, as they didn't know if they'd inadvertently become involved in a scene from the movie. Photos taken outside the establishment would capture a shirtless Spiridakos as he was arrested by local law enforcement on charges of assault. The man didn't make a plea during a subsequent hearing at Providence District Court, where he appeared disheveled while wearing a hospital gown and bandages on his head. He was released on a $10,000 bail in order to undergo a mental health evaluation. Number 5. Chase Holderby. Florida man Chase Holderby caused the disturbance, endangering himself and others, while at Walt Disney World's Epcot Park on September the 10th of 2022. As reported by witnesses, the father of two downed 2 beers in just 30 seconds near the American Adventure Pavilion. He was then seen stumbling around while shaking hands and high-fiving people in line. A Disney employee reportedly took his picture and asked vendors to stop selling him alcohol. Embarrassed, his group suggested they head towards the exit, at which point the 30-year-old became even more belligerent. He started cursing at security staff and pushing them around when they eventually asked he leave the park. Holderby took his shirt off and insisted he'd done nothing wrong before heading to the International Gateway. His aggressive behavior was reported to have alarmed people lined up for the Skyliner ride. He then forcefully boarded the ride and nearly fell off it as he continued yelling at security. His narrowly avoided plunge prompted staff to stop the ride in order to keep him safe. Holderby was eventually arrested by local police for trespassing and disorderly intoxication. He took a plea deal in November and avoided jail time in lieu of a $300 fine. Number 4. Mohammed Khan. On September the 16th of 2022, the body of United Kingdom monarch Queen Elizabeth II was being laid to rest at Westminster Hall. A man was arrested for causing a scene during the solemn event as he rushed from the queue of mourners to touch the Queen's coffin. After waiting for an estimated 14 hours, 28-year-old Mohammed Khan pushed through other mourners, knocking aside a young girl, then stepped off the carpet and made his way to the coffin. He managed to grab the royal standard flag draped over it with both hands in what appeared to be an attempt to lift it. Khan's actions resulted in a significant security scare, but he was promptly subdued, and videos subsequently shared online showed him being wrestled to the ground by security personnel. Khan was arrested and interviewed by the police, who later revealed that he didn't believe the Queen was dead and wanted to check for himself. He'd also planned to trespass into Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, and Balmoral Castle and tried to make contact with her. When asked how many times he would attempt it, Khan allegedly replied with, "As long as I'm living." He was charged with 2 counts under the Public Order Act for behavior intending to cause alarm, harassment, or distress. In the aftermath, it was determined that Khan suffered from delusions in which he believed that the Queen was still alive and that King Charles was somehow behind the staging of her death. Following a hearing in late September, he was granted bail provided he remained in a mental health hospital until his next court appearance. Number 3. Alice Sweet. Main man Alice Sweet walked into a Portland McDonald's in December of 2020 while carrying a chainsaw. 26-year-old Sweet chased would-be customers with the power tool before he went behind the counter. He revved the chainsaw intermittently at employees, then stole some food and a drink. Sweet fled the restaurant, and a manager attempted to confront him in the parking lot, but their exchange culminated with the worker being chased by the chainsaw wielder. Sweet also used the tool to damage several vehicles that were in the McDonald's parking lot. Local police caught up with him at a tire store nearby and took him into custody following a brief foot chase. Sweet was detained on charges of robbery, criminal mischief, refusing to submit to arrest, and violation of conditions of release. Number 2. Amanda Gonzalez. New Mexico woman Amanda Gonzalez was charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and the felony count of criminal damage to property on November the 15th of 2020. At around 7 a.m., law enforcement in Las Cruces were called to a home along the 1000 block of Chitamanja Road. 25-year-old Gonzalez had driven to the property to confront her ex, who was there with his new girlfriend. The couple and a female roommate awoke to the sound of pounding on the window. They went outside and were met by an enraged Gonzalez, who proceeded to punch her ex before being pushed to the ground. "That's what I needed," the young woman reportedly replied. The trio headed back after the altercation, but Gonzalez then accelerated towards the house and rammed her vehicle into it. Near the front door, her ex, his girlfriend, and the roommate re-emerged and were forced to jump to safety when Gonzalez drove towards them. She crashed into the house once more, leaving a gaping hole in its side and the Nissan with heavy damage to its front. The jilted woman then reversed into a nearby car but ended up stranding the Nissan on rock landscaping in front of the home. Unable to drive away, she tried to flee on foot but was soon taken into the custody of responding law enforcement. Number 1. Nikita Dragun. In November of 2022, police in Miami Beach were called to the Good Time Hotel after a guest was reportedly being extremely disorderly. Staff told the police that 26-year-old Nikita Dragan, a transgender model and beauty content YouTuber, had reportedly been walking around the pool area naked and causing a disturbance. Dragan had ignored the staff's demands that she stop acting inappropriately and reportedly threw water onto them. Responding officers accompanied the security personnel to her room from where loud music could be heard. Dragan was told that she needed to change her behavior or leave the hotel, at which point she slammed the door into the police and staff's faces. Shortly afterwards, Dragan opened the door again and asked them, "Do you want more?" Then swung an open water bottle, splashing the security personnel and an officer. She was arrested and charged with felony battery on a police officer, misdemeanor disorderly conduct, and misdemeanor battery. Outrage was triggered online following a subsequent recorded hearing in which Dragan asked the female judge if she was to remain in the men's unit, to which the judge replied that she didn't make the rules. A Miami-Dade corrections officer later clarified that Dragan had never been placed in the men's ward, but instead held in an open seating area while waiting to be processed. She was then transferred to a separate holding cell due to her high-profile status as an influencer, and escorted by an LGBTQ officer during her stay. Dragan took to Instagram on November the 20th, thanking her followers for support and claiming that she'd be taking a break from social media while focusing on taking care of her mental health. A man who allegedly broke into a home on June the 17th of 2017 ended up in the hospital after he was beaten up by the individual who resided there. It was unbeknownst to 28-year-old John Alexander Bracken that someone was inside the Monroe Avenue residence when he kicked the front door in at around 9 p.m. A struggle then ensued between the burglar and the homeowner. After being notified of the break-in, law enforcement arrived and found the suspect laying in the front yard, while the resident was reportedly uninjured. Bracken was taken to a medical center for treatment and later booked into the New Hanover County Jail in lieu of a $7,500 bond. He was facing charges of burglary, injury to personal property, and injury to real property. Number 10. Johnny Calderon Jr. and Gerald Allen. Two of the three men who attempted to pull off an armed robbery in Charlottesville, Virginia on August 27th of 2013 were left in blood and bruised in the face. During the robbery, one of the suspects, 19-year-old Johnny Calderon Jr., had his firearm knocked out of his hand by one of the victims. The two intended targets then attacked the would-be robbers. One of the suspects, who wasn't identified, subsequently seized the weapon and fled the scene as his partners were being pummeled. When law enforcement responded to the scene in the 2300 block of Fontaine Avenue, they found Calderon and Gerald Allen, aged 18, in the custody of the two unidentified male victims. The pair were reportedly taken to a hospital for treatment before being arrested. Both were charged with 2 counts of attempted robbery, while Calderon was additionally accused of pointing a firearm and using a firearm in the commission of a felony. Eventually, 2 counts of using a firearm in a felony were added to Allen's charges as well. Allen pleaded guilty and in 2015 was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the firearm offenses, while the 12-year sentence for attempted robbery was suspended. Calderon also pleaded guilty and faced the same punishment. Number 9. Exxon Gonzalez Caceres. At the Pilot Travel Center in Medley, Florida, a man attempting to steal a massive semi-truck was beaten up in a revenge pummeling on March the 9th of 2023. The incident took place on Northwest South River Drive when the alleged thief got into an unlocked semi-truck that was left running at a gas pump at approximately 10:30 a.m. The owner of the semi was in the store when he noticed that his blue 18-wheeler was in motion. He initially thought it was rolling by itself, but then saw a man behind the wheel. Footage of the theft was captured on camera as the victim chased after his stolen vehicle. The suspect floored it, seemingly trying to run over the men chasing him, and he consequently rammed into other cars. Eventually, the truck owner and another man were able to get the driver out of the cab and beat him up. According to Medley police, they were able to zip tie his hands and knees to immobilize him. Officers later arrested the suspect, identified as 24-year-old Exxon Gonzalez Caceres. In Miami-Dade court, Gonzalez Caceres was ordered to stay away from the gas station and the victim. He faced multiple charges, including battery, grand theft, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Number 8. Corey Kernott and Savannah Grillo in 2019. A California couple carried out violent vigilante attacks on bike thieves and posted footage of the beatings on YouTube. 25-year-old Corey Kernott and Savannah Grillo, aged 29, would reportedly leave a bicycle unlocked in the front yard of their Visalia home and wait for someone to try and steal it. At least 4 people attempted to take the planted bike between July and November and were beaten with a baseball bat for their misdeeds. The injuries sustained by the would-be thieves were described as non-life-threatening by local law enforcement. A neighbor stated that there would be blood in the street or on the sidewalks after the contrived beatings. On January the 8th of 2020, Kernott and Grillo were detained on assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy charges. The pair subsequently bailed out of jail and the videos of their assaults were taken down from the internet. The public information officer from the Visalia Police Department stated that investigators believed the couple's crimes were born out of frustration with ongoing vehicle burglaries in the area. Number 7. Liam Jones. Liam Jones, who'd formerly been convicted of various criminal charges, pulled out a bladed article on his friend during an argument over drugs. The incident, which took place in the town of Bargoed, South Wales in 2022, began when the 31-year-old smoked marijuana in a shed at Ashley Boylan's home. The latter accused Jones of stealing cannabis before a heated confrontation ensued. Jones pulled out a machete and swung it mere inches from his friend's face. Boylan then shouted to his partner, who was in the house with her children, to call the police. Jones took off carrying the weapon while Boylan and another man chased after him. He attempted to get into another residence but was pulled to the floor by his pursuers. He ultimately dropped the machete after Boylan picked up a piece of wood and hit him, leaving him with nasty injuries prior to his arrest. During Jones's trial, the prosecution highlighted the fact that he had previous convictions for robbery, burglary, wounding, and arson on his record. According to the man's lawyer, he suffered from an addiction to drugs and was diagnosed with ADHD. Wales Online reported on June the 9th of 2022 that Jones had been jailed for a year after admitting causing an affray and being in possession of a weapon. Number 6. Robber with a cardboard gun. On the night of January the 5th of 2019 in Rio, Brazil, a man who tried to rob a woman with a cardboard gun was punched, kicked, and locked in a rear naked choke before being arrested. 26-year-old Poliana Viana, a UFC fighter, was waiting for an Uber outside her apartment at around 8 p.m. when a man approached and asked her for the time. She answered, but he then continued lingering in close proximity to her. That was when the man told her to hand over her phone and not to cause a scene because he was armed. When the suspect put his hand over the weapon, Viana realized that it was a cardboard cutout and struck him with 2 punches and a kick. When the man fell, Viana subdued him with a chokehold from behind. Viana later said in an interview that the would-be robber then asked her to call authorities because he was afraid to be beaten up even more. In the aftermath, the man was left with a bloodied face. Nearby civilians called law enforcement, and the suspect was subsequently taken to a healthcare facility to have his injuries treated before being taken to the police station. The man had reportedly been arrested before and had just been released from custody shortly before the attempted robbery. Number 5. Anthony Nemeth. On Valentine's Day 2016, 25-year-old David West knocked an alleged robber down to protect his girlfriend, who was behind the counter of a Walgreens pharmacy in Bradenton, Florida. West, who was visiting his girlfriend, who was working that night, when a masked man later identified as 26-year-old Anthony Nemeth jumped over the counter demanding all the oxycodone 30s in the store. Nemeth reportedly claimed he had a gun. A struggle, which was captured by a surveillance camera in the store, subsequently broke out as West tried to tackle the suspect. After throwing 4 punches, West took the man to the ground and held him down until authorities arrived. The suspect was then taken to Blake Medical Center for treatment. According to a police affidavit, no items were stolen and no firearm was found on the would-be robber. West told ABC News that he was simply protecting the one he loved. Nemeth, who was charged with first-degree attempted robbery, appeared battered and bloodied in his mugshot. According to online booking records for Manatee County, he was held in custody on a $15,000 bond. Number 4. Anthony Prestopine. Anthony Prestopine got beaten up with a frying pan after he allegedly tried to force himself on a Pennsylvania woman in November of 2015. The 33-year-old was invited by the woman to her Sharon home for a drink. According to the police, the two were watching a movie when the woman fell asleep. She told investigators that when she woke up, Prestapine was attempting to assault her. He was asked to leave, and when he refused, the woman hit him in the face with a skillet, leaving him with a large cut on his cheek, blood on his nose, and a black eye, all of which were displayed in his resulting booking photo. Prestapine was held in custody on an assault charge. Number 3. Anthony Hall. A serial burglar from Newcastle, England, was left with serious injuries after he broke into an ex-rugby player's home on September the 8th of 2014. 22-year-old Anthony Hall entered the Red Car residence belonging to 48-year-old Stephen Waterfield at around 12:30 a.m. Waterfield heard a noise and went to the living room, where he saw Hall with both hands on his TV. Hall claimed that he thought it was his friend's property and subsequently lunged at the homeowner, who was once a flanker for Redcar's Union rugby team. Waterfield defended himself as the burglar reportedly bombarded him with kicks and punches. Eventually, the victim overpowered Hall and called the authorities. The suspect kicked Waterfield in the face as he attempted to flee. In his efforts to detain Hall, the ex-rugby player left him with gashes to his head, a bruised left eye, and a swollen cheekbone. Hall eventually left empty-handed but was arrested shortly thereafter. He later admitted to the burglary and was sentenced to 40 months in prison on November the 27th of 2014. Number 2. James Wood. 53-year-old James Wood of Aberdeen, Scotland, was left with 2 black eyes after stealing from his mother, Elizabeth, on December the 21st of 2014. After entering his mother's sheltered flat in the middle of the night, James took almost $300 from the 83-year-old's purse. His son, 25-year-old Matthew Wood, later discovered the money hidden inside a sofa at James's Torrey flat and reported it to the authorities. Before an arrest was made, James was allegedly beaten up by Matthew on January the 24th of 2015. When law enforcement took James into custody, he immediately confessed to the theft, but the cash was never recovered. At Aberdeen Sheriff Court, Wood was sentenced to 100 hours of unpaid work. He apologized, saying he was thoroughly ashamed by his behavior. His son also appeared in court, charged with assault causing severe injury, but he wasn't ultimately prosecuted due to a lack of evidence. The incident wasn't the first time James had stolen from his mother, explaining why he wasn't given a key to the mother's flat. According to the prosecution, James was said to have become an alcoholic after losing his job years earlier. For that reason, he claimed he couldn't even remember taking his mother's cash that night. Number 1. Anthony Miranda. On December the 2nd of 2011, convicted felon Anthony Miranda attempted to rob a martial arts expert who left him with cuts and bruises on his face. In Chicago at around 11:30 p.m., a 33-year-old man, only identified as Justin, was sitting in his car near Kenneth Avenue and 55th Street. 24-year-old Miranda approached him and asked him if he had a lighter. When Justin replied that he didn't, Miranda allegedly brandished a handgun and profanely demanded money. According to authorities, after the victim gave up his money, the mugger told him to get out of the car. Justin subsequently gained control of the gun, causing Miranda to shoot his own ankle in the process. Miranda was then brought to the ground and restrained until police officers arrived. Before being booked into jail, the suspect was treated at Holy Cross Hospital. He was then charged with armed robbery and aggravated discharge of a firearm. According to the Cook County Sheriff's Office, Miranda's bond was later set at $350,000. At about 5:15 a.m. on October the 16th of 2022, the police in Struthers, Ohio, pulled over a vehicle that had been spotted driving erratically down Youngstown Poland Road, almost mounting the curb several times. The police report also detailed that one of the car's headlights was disabled at the time. After the traffic stop was initiated, the driver, 31-year-old Miranda Fairchild, began shouting at the officer as he approached. The policeman informed Fairchild of why she'd been stopped, but she continued yelling at him, eventually punching him in the chest through the open car window. Backup officers subsequently arrived at the scene, but as they attempted to take the unruly motorist into custody, she continued to resist. According to the police, Fairchild kicked one of the officers in the groin before she was finally restrained in the back of the patrol car. She was then driven to Mahoning County Jail, where she was booked on charges of felony assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and driving with a suspended or revoked license. Number 6. Michelle English and Lucretia Bruno. On November the 24th of 2021, Florida women Michelle English and Lucretia Bruno went on a bar-hopping excursion that ultimately resulted in the death of an innocent man. The two friends reportedly started drinking at Roland's Bar and Billiards in Lakeland shortly after 4 p.m. From there, the pair drove separately to Lucky's Bar, where Bruno at one point drunkenly fell off her chair. She then stumbled out the door and, despite being exceedingly intoxicated, got back behind the wheel of her vehicle. At about 7:40 p.m., Bruno drove to a Wawa convenience store to purchase a sandwich, but the store clerk, who took note of her impaired state, tried taking away her car keys to prevent her from driving drunk. The woman snatched the keys before they could be confiscated, but then proceeded to leave them in the store's bathroom while she sat in her car. Another customer found them and gave them to the clerk, who subsequently contacted the police about Bruno. While the latter was obviously intoxicated when officers interacted with her, she wasn't in possession of her car keys, so they were unable to arrest her for DUI. Shortly thereafter, English arrived at the Wawa to pick up her friend. The police instructed her to drive Bruno home and told the clerk not to release her keys until the following day. Officers subsequently watched English drive away with Bruno in the passenger seat, at which point they left, believing the situation to be resolved. However, a short time later, English returned to the Wawa to retrieve Bruno's car keys. The clerk relinquished the keys, thinking she simply needed them to move her friend's car. Instead, English handed the keys back over to Bruno, who, despite her impaired state, got back into her vehicle and drove away. Less than 10 minutes later, Bruno was involved in a crash on Interstate 4. The 47-year-old sideswiped a truck that was pulled over to the shoulder, consequently killing a man from holiday. After the police caught up with her and finally took her into custody, her blood alcohol level was determined to be nearly 3 times the legal driving limit in Florida. Bruno was charged with DUI manslaughter, DUI, and 2 counts of DUI with property damage. English, meanwhile, was also arrested for openly flouting law enforcement's order not to allow her friend to drive until she sobered up. Number 5. Titus Lowe. In December of 2021, a Singaporean OnlyFans star was detained by police after an explicit video of him was found on his 12-year-old niece's phone. He was charged with breaking the country's obscenity laws, which outlawed the sale and production of adult films and other explicit materials. 22-year-old Titus Lowe had joined the site, famous for its adult content, back in April of that same year, and prior to his arrest, had amassed over 3,000, mostly male, paid subscribers. However, following his run-in with the law, Lowe was ordered by the authorities to remain off the explicit content creation platform. In October of 2022, it was reported that Lowe had been taken back into police custody for allegedly violating the order to stay off OnlyFans. He was charged with breaching a police order, as well as another count of transmitting obscene material, to which he pleaded guilty. Lowe admitted to making repeated attempts to regain access to his OnlyFans account because he felt obligated to continue providing content for his paying subscribers. The young man was consequently jailed for 3 weeks. Number 4. Danny Presti. In 2020, New York City man Danny Presti, the co-owner of Mac's Public House in Staten Island, got into a contentious feud with city officials over COVID-19 restrictions that precluded establishments such as his from resuming service. Early on December the 6th, NYPD officers were sent to Presti's bar to arrest him for serving customers in direct violation of city and state closure orders. Instead of complying with law enforcement, however, the man tried to simply leave the scene in his vehicle, but after doing so ran over an officer, then continued driving for about 100 yards while the policeman was still hanging on the hood. The 34-year-old pub owner eventually came to a stop, at which point he was arrested on charges that included third-degree assault, reckless driving, menacing, and resisting arrest. Leading up to the incident, Presti had been clashing with New York authorities over their attempts to shut his business down amid spiking COVID-19 rates. In the area where Mac's Public House was located, a week before the man's violent encounter with law enforcement, his tavern had been the site of protests after he was arrested for violating coronavirus restrictions and obstructing governmental administration. With the bar's owner in custody, officials ordered that it remain closed to the public and even stationed officers outside to make sure the front door was locked. The establishment persisted in its defiance of the law, however, allegedly directing patrons to a building next door through which they were able to access the bar, leading to the events that culminated in Presti's second arrest. Number 3. Tana Dahl. In April of 2021, reports surfaced regarding a contentious traffic stop that turned violent one night on the streets of Missoula, Montana. According to court documents, local police officers observed a pickup truck driving erratically around the parking lot next to the Missoula Fire Science Lab. An officer present at the scene that night reported seeing the vehicle repeatedly traveling in circles at a high rate of speed. Law enforcement subsequently tried to initiate the traffic stop at about 2:30 a.m., but the motorist initially refused to comply. The truck then failed to yield the right-of-way and continued to swerve in and out of the painted lanes before finally slowing to a stop. Officers were then able to make contact with the driver, who was identified as 33-year-old Tana Dahl. The latter reportedly exhibited obvious signs of intoxication, prompting the police to investigate the possibility that she'd been driving under the influence. While searching Dahl's vehicle, officers came upon 3 open beer bottles in the passenger seat and center floorboard. Following this discovery, the police told the woman she was being placed under arrest, at which point she became uncooperative. She resisted the officers as they attempted to handcuff her and wasn't successfully put into the back of the squad car until the arrival of backup officers to assist. Even after she'd been taken into custody, Dahl continued to resist, and at one point she allegedly kicked at law enforcement and struck an officer several times. She then lunged forward in an attempt to escape, to which the police responded by laying her down backwards in the vehicle. Dahl's defiance wasn't done, however, as she subsequently kicked an officer in the groin before finally being restrained sufficiently. She was taken to St. Patrick's Hospital for an evaluation. Her criminal charges stemming from the incident included felony assault on a peace officer and driving under the influence. Number 2. Michael Heath Buchanan. In the afternoon of February the 7th of 2019, Florida police were called to a home on Fieldbrook Way in the village of Fernandina, where a man was found to be in violation of a protection order. The suspect, identified as 60-year-old Michael Heath Buchanan, had previously been arrested for a New Year's Eve attack on his wife, which landed her in the hospital. The woman had reportedly been talking on the phone with a friend from out of state when Buchanan suddenly became aggravated and aggressively grabbed her by the neck. She fled to the back patio, where she called the police. She was then taken to the village's regional hospital for a swollen neck. In court, Buchanan was given a permanent injunction prohibiting him from entering his and his wife's house or from making any form of contact with her. On February the 7th, the woman found her husband sleeping between a grill and sliding glass door at the home and subsequently called the police on him. He was taken back into custody for violating the court order and booked at the Sumter County Detention Center without bond. Number 1. Chris Pritchard. A woman from eastern Iowa was gunned down at her dog daycare business on the morning of October the 8th of 2022. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office was notified of the situation shortly before 8 a.m. when a 911 caller reported the shooting. Officers were subsequently dispatched to the Mississippi Ridge Kennels, located on Highway 52 in Bellevue, where they found 55-year-old Angela Pritchard dead from an apparent gunshot wound. Investigators immediately suspected the victim's estranged husband, Chris. Back in April of 2022, the couple were involved in a domestic violence incident that resulted in Chris facing criminal charges, as well as a protection order that banned him from contacting his wife. The man later violated the order by texting her, but he wasn't taken into custody until the early hours of October the 9th, the day after Angela's killing. Following his arrest, Chris allegedly admitted to confronting her at her place of work with a 20-gauge shotgun because he was upset about the no-contact order. He also confessed to fatally shooting her, then fleeing the scene. The 56-year-old man was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree robbery, both of which are categorized as felony offenses. On October the 31st, Chris pleaded not guilty during a preliminary hearing in Jackson County District Court. Later that month, the man's stepson, Joshua Close, filed a wrongful death suit against him, seeking compensation for damages related to the state and earnings from his mother upon her death. As of the most recent updates, a date for Chris's murder trial hadn't yet been scheduled. 36-year-old New York woman Sarah Lilly was arrested in January of 2023 in connection to a fire that had ravaged several units at Springbrook Apartments in Springville. Erie County Sheriff's deputies and multiple volunteer fire companies were dispatched to deal with the rapidly expanding blaze on January the 23rd. Several homes were destroyed and at least 20 residents were displaced, but no injuries were reported. The authorities determined that the face-tattooed Lilly was a resident on the same block and that she'd intentionally started the fire in her apartment, although her motives remained unclear. She was subsequently charged with 1 count of arson in the 2nd degree, a Class B felony. Lilly was held without bail pending a pre-trial hearing, expected to take place in March. If convicted, she faced up to 25 years in prison. At the time of her arson charges, Lilly had a pending felony burglary and petty theft case in Springville Village Court, stemming from an incident that had occurred on October the 20th of 2022. On that day, she'd entered and unlawfully remained inside of a Walmart on South Cascade Drive, stealing about $40 worth of merchandise. She'd done so in spite of having been banned from the store following a shoplifting incident that had occurred earlier in the year. Number 7. Brianna Johnson. On the evening of July the 18th of 2022, Brianna Johnson and her boyfriend, 25-year-old Ricky Doyle, were arguing at a gas station in Arlington, Texas. As indicated by a police affidavit, the woman had at one point threatened to kill Doyle. 24-year-old Johnson then pumped gasoline on her boyfriend as he sat in the back of a Jeep. Moments later, she walked around to the driver's side and lit the liquid. Doyle was quickly engulfed by flames. He got out of the vehicle and ran around the parking lot trying to stop his body from burning. By the time that a customer used a fire extinguisher to put him out, Doyle was bleeding and had skin that appeared to have melted off his body. As bystanders tended to his wounds in the gas station, Johnson reportedly tried to claim that he'd accidentally caught fire because she'd been smoking while pumping gas. However, witnesses confronted her, saying that they'd seen her intentionally setting him ablaze. One bystander tried to detain Johnson until the police arrived, but the woman pushed them to the ground and drove away. She was arrested later in the month and initially charged with aggravated assault. Doyle succumbed to his injuries on August the 2nd, which led to Johnson's charges being updated to murder. Number 6. Angelina Cando. New York City woman Angelina Cando, aged 30, was arrested in mid-February of 2022 for setting fire to a gay pride flag and vandalizing 2 police squad cars. Cando was caught by surveillance cameras approaching the French bistro Little Prince in Soho at around 1:30 a.m. She used a lighter and ignited a rainbow-colored Make America Gay Again flag that was hanging outside the restaurant. The fire damaged the outside of the establishment and filled the interior with smoke while workers were still inside. The blaze was extinguished by first responders and no injuries were reported. Cando was subsequently arrested and charged with arson, criminal mischief, and reckless endangerment, all classified as hate crimes. She was also charged with criminal mischief for scrawling "Jesus is King" on the back of 2 NYPD squad cars parked on Varick Street between Erickson Place and North Moore Street. The woman, who lived in Manhattan, not far from the restaurant, appeared before a judge on February the 22nd and, in spite of the damning evidence, had several outbursts proclaiming her innocence. A subsequent court date was set for March. The arson case marked Cando's 3rd arrest over the course of a month. She'd previously been taken into custody for assault following an incident from January the 30th in which she'd allegedly attacked a 67-year-old male relative in her apartment. She'd reportedly hit him with a guitar in addition to throwing a plate and a glass at him. A few days later, on February the 2nd, she threatened a man with a knife in a pizza shop. She was released without bail after both incidents. Number 5. Wilbur Romero. On October the 13th of 2019, at around 4:30 a.m., A fire erupted at the Romero household in Logan Heights, San Diego. Only 26-year-old Wilbur Romero escaped the blaze unscathed. His father, Jose Antonio, aged 44, was found dead inside the home, while his mother, 46-year-old Nicolasa, succumbed to her injuries in a hospital. Wilbur's sister, 21-year-old Iris Romero, was reported to have used her body to shield their teenage brother, Angel, who was able to get out of the home by climbing through a window. Their sister Wendy, aged 24, reportedly banged on a door with such force that she broke her fingers. As she struggled to escape the house, neighbors kicked down the door and were able to save her. Witnesses would later report seeing family members poking their fingers through bars in the windows as the raging flames consumed their home. Wendy and Angel were injured, but they survived, while Iris passed away in a hospital 2 days after the fire. In the incident's immediate aftermath, Wilbur told a media outlet that he'd been awakened by his dog and saw that his bed was on fire. He claimed that after leaving the home, he'd tried to save those still trapped inside by using a garden hose before calling for help.
There was one detective that was trying to tell me to say that I did it, and it goes like this, and I can tell you, detective, this. I'm not gonna say I did it because I know I didn't do it.
Later on, he attended a vigil for his deceased family members where he thanked neighbors and friends for their support. Within a few days, however, law enforcement determined that Wilbur had actually started the fire inside his home before slipping out of a side door with the family dog. He was arrested on charges of murder, attempted murder, and arson. Angel claimed that Wilbur had started fires around the home about a dozen times in the past, including a recent one on the roof, and that he talked about burning the house down and burning everybody in it. It subsequently emerged that the fire had originated on his bed. Wendy told detectives that her brother had ignored her and ran down the street when she screamed at him for help while trapped in the house. Wilbur's public defender nevertheless argued that he'd loved his family and didn't want them to die, pointing to his efforts of using a hose to try and put out the fire as evidence in that regard. In October of 2022, Wilbur pleaded guilty to second-degree murder charges and was ultimately sentenced to 45 years in prison. Number 4. Ryan Morrow. A Georgia teenager was identified as the person behind 2 fires which had erupted in Coweta County in March of 2023. In the early morning hours of March the 8th, Coweta County Fire Rescue were called to both a mobile home fire and a travel trailer fire. Law enforcement determined that the 2 blazes were connected and that both had been started by 18-year-old Ryan Morrow. He was arrested that same day in a mobile home from the area. The police launched an investigation but didn't disclose Morrow's connection to the burning homes or their owners. The teenager was arrested and charged with reckless conduct, criminal damage to property, and 2 counts of first-degree arson. Number 3. William Gary Wright. In the fall of 2022, the Chatham County Police Department was called on the 200 block of Larchmont Drive in Savannah, Georgia, to reports of a woman on fire. Officers determined that the unnamed victim had been involved in a domestic dispute with 42-year-old William Gary Wright. As the argument escalated, the latter had reportedly poured gasoline on her and set her ablaze. The 31-year-old woman was first taken to a Savannah hospital and later transported to a burn center in Augusta with 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Her condition wasn't reported to have been life-threatening. Wright was arrested and taken to Chatham County Detention Center. The man, who appeared to be distraught in his booking photo, was charged with aggravated assault and aggravated battery. Number 2. Buckingham Palace Incident. On December the 20th of 2022, a man was detained by law enforcement in London, England, after he'd started a fire outside Buckingham Palace. A short clip subsequently started circulating on social media that showed the unidentified 30-year-old igniting something while at the gates of the royal residence. The police responded within seconds, and an officer took the man to the ground, pinning him with his knee. A second officer then arrived at the scene to help secure the suspect. According to the police's initial findings, the man's actions had been a form of protest, although his cause wasn't specified. The fire was extinguished and he was arrested on suspicion of causing criminal damage. Number 1. Chofel Norbu. In October of 2022, a New York City man set fire to the Bangladeshi Itadi Garden and Grill in Queens after the restaurant had reportedly gotten his order wrong. The fire department of New York released CCTV footage of a man clad in all black subsequently identified as 49-year-old Shoful Norbu, as he picked up a bucket and poured it through the slots of the restaurant's gates. The establishment was closed at the time, which was around 6 a.m. Norbu then bent down and lit the flammable liquid, which erupted in a massive flame. It blasted back against the arsonist, and the surveillance clip would show him fleeing with his shoes ablaze. The fire continued to burn on the pavement outside the restaurant, while the business itself sustained superficial damage, mainly to its windows. The fire department released the footage on social media, and within less than 2 weeks of the October 2nd incident, Norbu was arrested without incident. He revealed to law enforcement that he'd started the fire as a way of retaliating against the restaurant for his botched order. Norbu was quoted as saying, "I was very drunk. I bought chicken biryani. They didn't give me chicken biryani." The man was charged with arson, criminal mischief, and reckless endangerment. Under New York bail reform laws, the charges made Norbu eligible for release, which he was granted during an arraignment on October 15th. The decision was criticized by online users reacting to the news and frustrated police officers who'd worked alongside the fire department to track Norbu down. One officer told a media outlet, "He set a store on fire. He planned this. Why is he out the next day?" A former financial advisor from the US was arrested in early 2023 as part of a homicide investigation by Colombian authorities. 35-year-old John Poulos had lived in the city of Franklin, Wisconsin with his wife and 3 children for years prior to the collapse of his marriage in 2021. When Poulos' wife filed for divorce, he ceased all contact with his kids before abruptly leaving the country altogether in January of 2023. He reportedly traveled to Colombia to meet up with his long-distance girlfriend, whom he'd met on a dating app after the divorce. Poulos and 23-year-old Valentina Tres Palacios, a popular Colombian DJ, rented a short-stay apartment in Bogota, which they were seen entering on January the 20th. 2 days later, Poulos exited the rental property with a blue suitcase, but Tres Palacios was nowhere to be found. Her body was later found inside the suitcase, which the man had discarded in a dumpster near Bogota's El Dorado International Airport. After his girlfriend's remains were recovered, Poulos fled the country, at which point an Interpol alert was issued for him. He was subsequently located and detained at Panama City's International Airport before being transferred to the custody of Colombian officials. His alleged plan had been to fly from Panama to Turkey, then hide out in Istanbul. Prosecutors accused Poulos of fatally strangling Tres Palacios before throwing her remains in the trash. In regards to a potential motive for the crime, the victim's friends told police that Poulos had exhibited jealous and controlling tendencies throughout their months-long relationship. He'd even gone so far as to hire a private investigator to keep tabs on her whereabouts. When asked to comment on the situation, Poulos' estranged wife Ashley revealed that he was abusive during their marriage and had left the family with nothing after transferring their entire marital estate to an offshore trust. Charged with femicide, Poulos faced the possibility of spending up to 50 years behind bars if convicted in Colombian court. Number 5. Gabriel Christian Natale Hidioth and Finnegan Lee Elder. During the summer of 2019, the police in Rome, Italy, received a report from a man who claimed that a pair of teenaged American tourists had stolen his backpack. Officer Mario Cecilio Rega, who had returned to duty only a few days earlier following his honeymoon, was dispatched to investigate the report, which cited 18-year-old Gabriel Christian Natal Hidioth and Finnegan Lee Elder, aged 19, as the alleged thieves. Natal Hidioth and Elder, who were both from the affluent San Francisco suburb of Mill Valley, had been in Rome on holiday when the incident occurred. They claimed to have purchased cocaine from the alleged theft victim, which turned out to be aspirin. In relation, they placed a threatening phone call demanding cash and drugs in exchange for the backpack's return. The teens subsequently arranged a meeting with the drug dealer, but Officer Rega showed up in his place. The resulting encounter quickly turned into a violent struggle, during the course of which Elder fatally stabbed the officer 11 times, while Natal Hidioth repeatedly punched his partner. After fleeing the scene in the aftermath, the teenagers were tracked to a hotel where they were reportedly making arrangements to flee the country. Officers recovered a knife of considerable size that the killers had concealed in one of the hotel room's ceiling panels. Natal Hidioth and Elder were taken into police custody and ultimately tried for murder. Although they were initially sentenced to life in prison for the crime, an Italian appeals court reduced their prison terms to 22 and 24 years. Number 4. Shadid Abdul Mateen. On the night of June the 14th of 2021, a female college student was assaulted and murdered near the Shiji Avenue metro station in Ningbo in China's Zhejiang province. In the early hours of the following morning, local police arrested a man named Shadid Abdul Mateen in connection with the crime. Abdul Mateen had reportedly been a mobile phone salesman in the US before moving to China to teach English at the Ningbo University of Technology. In early 2019, the man met 21-year-old Chen Shijun, a student at the university. Abdul Mateen lied to Chen, telling her he was divorced, and the pair subsequently sparked up a romantic relationship. In May, however, the young woman tried to break things off between them, triggering a verbally intimidating response from Abdul Mateen in which he allegedly threatened her. They continued dating until the following month, when Chen was found dead in a grove of trees. Abdul Mateen confessed to abusing the young woman before fatally stabbing her in the face and neck with a folding knife, citing a relationship dispute as the reason for the brutal attack. Authorities filed an indictment for the crime of intentional homicide against the American expatriate to the Ningbo Intermediate People's Court. Following the ensuing trial, Abdul Mateen was found guilty and consequently sentenced to death. Number 3. Jennifer Erin Talbot. In September of 2019, an American woman was caught trying to smuggle a 6-day-old baby boy out of the Philippines. On the 4th of the month, 43-year-old Jennifer Erin Talbot was intercepted by airline workers at Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila while attempting to board a flight to Detroit, Michigan. Although she was able to pass through the airport immigration counter without declaring the newborn, who was hidden inside a sling bag, Talbot's good fortune ran out when she reached the boarding gate. The mother of 5 was unable to produce a passport, boarding pass, or government permits for the child, and she was subsequently arrested by immigration personnel. In official law enforcement documents, Talbot was accused of brokering an illegal adoption with Maricris Dulap, a teenage girl from the Philippines. The pair met online before Talbot flew to Davao to await the child's birth. Following her arrest, Talbot presented authorities with an affidavit allegedly from Dulap giving consent for the baby to travel to the US. However, the baby's mother hadn't provided a signature, nor had the child been granted government travel approval. Talbot was charged with human trafficking, while Dulap and the child's father were also charged under a child protection law. Meanwhile, the newborn was taken into the custody of the Department of Social Welfare. Talbot, originally from Ohio, had reportedly been living in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, Utah, prior to her arrest. Although her sentence hadn't been publicly announced, as of the most recent updates, her criminal charges carry a maximum penalty of life in prison. Number 2. Shazan Kasim. A 29-year-old American expatriate was criminally charged in the UAE after posting a parody video online mocking the nation's youth culture. According to his family, Shazan Kasim, originally from Woodbury, Minnesota, had moved to Dubai to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers after graduating college in 2006. However, his life abroad turned upside down in October of 2012 when he uploaded a mock documentary filled with biting social commentary. The video reportedly depicted a fictional Satwa combat school referencing the Satwa G, a derisive moniker given to suburban Dubai teens from Al Satwa, who are known to talk tougher than they really were. In the 19-minute clip, the combat school students were taught to throw sandals as weapons and call for backup on social media when under attack. As a consequence, for the sarcastic but harmless video, Kasim was arrested and charged with endangering state security. The man was further accused of violating Article 28 of the new UAE legislation aimed at governing internet usage and mitigating cybercrimes. He was sentenced to a year behind bars plus a fine of $2,700. In June of 2013, Kasim was transferred to Al Watba prison in Abu Dhabi, where he was held along with other unnamed foreigners who participated in the creation of the video. Following his release, he returned to the US in 2014, at which point he publicly directed scathing criticism towards UAE authorities. Kasim condemned the country for trying him in a textbook kangaroo court before convicting him without any evidence. Number 1. Heather Mack and Tommy Schaefer. Between January of 2004 and June of 2013, law enforcement in Cook County, Illinois responded to the home belonging to Sheila Von Weiss Mack in relation to 86 separate domestic incidents involving her and her daughter Heather. They had a contentious relationship fraught with theft and violence, including altercations that left Von Weiss Mack with broken bones. The mother and daughter were at odds, in part because of Heather's relationship to Tommy Schaefer, an unemployed rapper who went by the stage name Tommy EXX, whom she'd met at Oak Park and River Forest High School. Von Weissmack thoroughly disapproved of Schaefer, so she sold their house and moved with Heather to the Gold Coast Historic District of Chicago. In spite of the increased distance between them, Heather continued seeing Schaefer and eventually became pregnant with his child. Court records indicated that Von Weissmack had forced her daughter to terminate pregnancies on 2 separate occasions in the past. She attempted to obtain a power of attorney over Heather in order to force a 3rd abortion. In August of 2014, while they were still waiting on blood tests to confirm the teen was actually pregnant, the mother and daughter went on a trip to Bali, Indonesia. Unbeknownst to Weissmack, Heather used her credit card to purchase a plane ticket to Bali for Schaefer as well. Although he later claimed to have gone on the trip to hash things out with his girlfriend's mom, Schaefer was seen arguing with her in the lobby of the St. Regis Hotel in Nusa Dua shortly after his arrival. Later that night, the young man allegedly killed Von Weissmack with a metallic blunt object in their hotel room. He and Heather subsequently stuffed the woman's body in a suitcase, which they placed in the trunk of a taxicab outside the hotel. A security guard noticed blood on the suitcase, which led to the discovery of Von Weissmack's remains inside. Police caught up with the killers at a nearby motel a short time later. Despite claiming that the victim had actually been killed by a group of robbers, the couple were arrested. Both Heather and Schaefer were charged with premeditated murder, for which they faced a potential punishment of death by firing squad. However, in April of 2015, following criminal proceedings in Indonesian court, Heather was sent to prison for 10 years and Schaefer for 18. During sentencing, the judge admitted to being somewhat lenient because Heather had just recently given birth to the couple's child. Number 8. Mark Jones. In November of 2020, Mark Jones was elected as the District Attorney of Muskogee County, Georgia. He officially took office the following January, but only 9 months into his term, Jones was indicted on multiple felony counts in connection to a public corruption scandal. Court documents revealed that the DA had allegedly offered $1,000 bribes to prosecutors and law enforcement officials on several occasions in order to influence various legal cases. One such incident had occurred during the grand jury hearing of Sarah Holtrop, a Hamilton teen who'd accidentally been shot by an acquaintance named Elijah Farrell. While the latter had only been charged with manslaughter, Jones attempted to bribe a police officer into testifying that Farrell had been in a relationship with the victim and that he'd shot her in a fit of jealousy. The DA reportedly sought to fabricate a motive for the shooting so that prosecutors could upgrade the charge to murder. Jones's criminal indictment in September of 2021 also indicated that he'd bribed multiple prosecutors in his office in connection to other cases. On October the 4th, Jones was suspended from office by Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. A month later, the disgraced DA entered last-minute guilty pleas on 4 of the felony counts levied against him. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison and an additional 4 years of probation. Number 7. Rudy Delgado. A former judge from Texas named Rudy Delgado was taken into police custody in February of 2018, roughly 2 years after the FBI had launched a probe into his activities while serving on the Hidalgo County District Court. The investigation uncovered that the 66-year-old had accepted thousands of dollars in bribes from a defense attorney named Noe Perez between 2008 and 2016. In exchange for the cash sums, Delgado had allegedly agreed to issue favorable judicial outcomes in cases involving Perez's clients. The criminal defense lawyer reportedly concealed the bribe money in 6 packs of beer, which he then gave to Delgado. The FBI also learned that Perez had gifted a $15,000 pickup truck to Delgado in an effort to curry the judge's favor. Following the investigation, Delgado was charged with conspiracy, federal program bribery, Travel Act bribery, and obstruction of justice. The latter charge reportedly stemmed from a message the judge had sent to Perez in which he attempted to pass off the bribes as campaign donations. In July of 2019, Delgado was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. Number 6. Ryan Bishti and Frank Partridge. In 2009, entrepreneur Ryan Bishti founded a nightclub called Cirque Le Soir in the Soho area of central London. Before long, the club grew into a hotspot for celebrities, having reportedly attracted the likes of Cara Delevingne, Miley Cyrus, and Rihanna since its opening. As Cirque du Soir rose to prominence, however, Bishti allegedly became a central figure in a bribery scandal involving officers of the Westminster Police. Between February of 2013 and June of 2015, the club owner reportedly conspired with a sergeant named Frank Partridge in the Westminster Police's licensing unit. Although the specific details of their relationship were not immediately reported, Bishti and Partridge had allegedly agreed to a deal in which the former and his club were afforded certain liberties by local police, reputedly in exchange for cash. The scheme was uncovered by investigators from the Directorate of Professional Standards Anti-Corruption Command. In December of 2021, a total of 7 defendants, including Bishti and Partridge, appeared during a hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court. One of the individuals accused of criminal activity was Terry Neal, the owner of a security firm named TSS, which reportedly provided door staff to Cirque du Soir and other Soho nightclubs. The suspects were each charged with conspiracy to commit bribery, and they were scheduled to stand trial in April of 2023. Number 5. Ariel Engert. At approximately 2 a.m. on September the 1st of 2015, police officers in Clearwater, Florida, spotted a car driving erratically on the roadway. They pulled the vehicle over and asked its driver, 24-year-old Ariel Engert, to step out onto the sidewalk. The young woman then underwent a series of field sobriety tests, all of which she failed. The officers consequently arrested her and brought her to Pinellas County Jail. Engert was charged with driving under the influence and possession of marijuana, which had reportedly been found in her vehicle. According to a website called The Smoking Gun, Engert attempted to bribe multiple deputies while she was in custody. She had allegedly offered to engage in intimate relations with a deputy named Brian Sudbrink in exchange for him allowing her to go free, a proposition which the officer declined. When a body search revealed that Engert had hidden a packet of cocaine in her undergarments, the young woman tried to bribe 2 more officers with the same offer she'd extended to Sudbrink. The deputies, named as Obed Munoz and Eric Biddle, promptly and decisively rejected her indecent proposals. Engert ultimately faced additional charges of narcotics possession and introduction of contraband into a detention facility. Number 4. The California DMV bribery scandal. An investigation into alleged corruption within the California Department of Motor Vehicles uncovered a bribery conspiracy pertaining to the production and distribution of fraudulent driver's licenses. A criminal indictment was publicly released by the U.S. Department of Justice in May of 2021. The press release detailed how several people from the Los Angeles area had paid off DMV employees in order to illegally obtain licenses for which they would have otherwise been ineligible. The professed ringleader of the operation was identified as 46-year-old Atanasio Villegas, who'd reportedly worked as a license registration examiner at the DMV office in Torrance. Villegas communicated with brokers who accepted bribe money from individuals seeking fraudulent IDs. These brokers supplied the corrupt DMV worker with the client's personal identifying information. Villegas then solicited the help of other DMV employees, who falsified information in the department's database to make it appear as if the applicant had passed all the tests and requirements necessary towards obtaining a license. It was reported that Villegas and his co-conspirators had produced and issued more than 100 fake IDs while operating their scam from April to October of 2016. In 2021, multiple people were criminally charged in relation to the case, including Villegas, other DMV employees, and individuals who were found to have illegally acquired their driver's licenses by way of the illicit scheme. Number 3. Babak Bromand. 53-year-old Babak Bromand had served as an FBI special agent in Northern California for 2 decades before retiring in 2019. Shortly thereafter, allegations surfaced that between 2015 and 2017, Bromand had accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes from a lawyer with ties to an Armenian criminal element. During the 2-year period in which he was accused of taking part in the bribery scheme, the former FBI agent had reportedly been working on national security matters at the San Francisco field office. The corrupt attorney, identified as Edgar Sargassian, was alleged to have given Bromand cash and expensive gifts, which included a motorcycle, hotel stays, and escort services. in exchange for confidential information. A federal criminal complaint against Roland stated that he'd also used his power and privilege as an FBI employee to help Sargassian evade detection by law enforcement. It later emerged that the former special agent had used a portion of the reported $200,000 in bribe money he'd accepted to make a down payment on a $1.3 million vacation home near Lake Tahoe. Following his retirement, Roland had worked as a campus investigator at the University of California, Berkeley, until his arrest on April the 24th of 2020. He was thereupon charged with conspiracy to commit bribery of a public official in April of 2021. He was also charged with 3 counts of making false statements to a government agency after it had been discovered that he'd falsified federal documents to mask the true origin of the bribe money. Today's topic was requested by Esther Cavadia. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. The arrest of Jirapong Thanapat. On August the 5th of 2021, Jirapong Thanapat, age 24, was taken into police custody with his girlfriend after they'd been caught selling illegal substances in northeast Thailand. The suspect reportedly offered Thai police roughly $25,000 in an effort to facilitate his and his partner's immediate release. The officers initially accepted Thanapat's bribe, but they subsequently attempted to extort even more money from him by way of torture. The police chief, identified as Thetisan Utanapon, allegedly wrapped 5 plastic bags around Thanapat's head and taped his hands together. The chief then proceeded to shake the suspect violently while trying to get him to double the amount of money he'd offered them. Thanapat eventually collapsed unconscious, and the officers' attempts to revive him proved unsuccessful. He was transported to a hospital where he was pronounced dead the following day. An autopsy would eventually confirm initial suspicions that he'd succumbed to deliberate suffocation. Utanapon reportedly recorded the death as a drug overdose and released Thanapat's girlfriend on the condition that she not reveal the truth about the incident. A junior officer at the police station later leaked CCTV footage of Thanapat being tortured, which prompted the Thai Prime Minister to order an investigation into the man's death. Several officers were taken into custody following the probe, while Utanapon eventually surrendered to the authorities after he'd initially gone on the run. Number 1. Operation Varsity Blues. On March the 12th of 2019, federal prosecutors in Boston, Massachusetts, publicly disclosed the details of a vast criminal conspiracy centered on bribing admissions officials at several notable American universities. The FBI's investigation, which had been codenamed Operation Varsity Blues, exposed a total of 53 individuals who'd taken part in the bribery scandal between 2011 and 2018. 33 of the defendants were parents of college applicants who'd allegedly paid more than $25 million in total bribe money to William Rick Singer, the man responsible for orchestrating the scheme. Federal investigators learned that Singer had coordinated the illicit operation through the 2 college counseling firms he owned, Key Worldwide Foundation and the Edge College and Career Network. After accepting money from parents, Singer would fraudulently inflate applicants' entrance exam test scores. If the falsified test results didn't strengthen the application enough for the student to be accepted into the university directly, Singer would often resort to simply using monetary bribes to influence college admissions decisions. He also allegedly fabricated elite sports credentials on behalf of certain students so as to award them athletic scholarships that they wouldn't have otherwise been granted. In addition to Singer and the parents from whom he'd accepted bribes, the criminal indictments also implicated staff members at various prestigious universities including Yale, Stanford, Georgetown, Northwestern, and the University of Southern California. After news of the scandal had been made public, it emerged that a number of the parents alleged to have been involved were prominent public figures including actors Lori Loughlin, William H. Macy, and Felicity Huffman, as well as business people Gamal Aziz, Manuel Enriquez, and Jane Buckingham. The maximum penalty for the charges against Singer was 65 years in prison and a $1.25 million fine. The conspiracy's first criminal trial, which reportedly involved Aziz and another parent named John Wilson, began on September the 8th of 2021. Both men were convicted the following month after the jury assigned to their case had deliberated for roughly 10 hours. A video of a man being forcefully arrested in the middle of the street in Providence, Rhode Island, spread quickly on the internet and led to an internal police investigation in the summer of 2022. It was disclosed in subsequent reports that the individual being detained in the viral footage was 21-year-old Armando Rivas. Two Providence officers named as Stephen Genserea and Matthew Jeanette were in the process of towing Rivas's car on the night of the 4th of July fireworks at India Point Park when the young man came on the scene and tried to stop them. According to a police report, Rivas yelled racial obscenities at the officers, then attempted to enter the vehicle being towed, at which point they decided to arrest him. The young man allegedly began to flail, kick and punch at both officers and was then taken to the ground. Officer Genserea grabbed the back of Rivas's head and smashed it into the pavement to subdue him enough to put him in handcuffs. In the wake of his arrest, Rivas faced charges of disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, obstructing an officer, and simple assault. The video proved controversial because while some expressed their belief that the officers were just trying to detain a particularly combative suspect, others viewed the rough treatment of Rivas as an example of excessive force. The Providence Public Safety Commissioner indicated that the officer's conduct was under review. As of the latest updates, the case was still ongoing. Number 7. Rebecca Warren. A former Michigan state representative made headlines in early 2020 following the emergence of a police body cam video in which she was arrested for driving while super drunk. 49-year-old Rebecca Warren, who began her career as a legislator in the Great Lakes state back in 2006, was seen by other motorists swerving in and out of the painted lines along Interstate 75 the day after Christmas in 2019. When Auburn Hills police caught up with her, they observed her veer into the breakdown lane and strike a guardrail. Warren was pulled over and asked to take a field sobriety test, but stumbled upon exiting her vehicle. She said she was returning home to Ann Arbor after attending an event where she admitted to drinking 2 or 3 glasses of wine. Warren protested as officers subsequently placed her in handcuffs, saying, "You don't understand. I'm elected. I'm a senator. People will be like, the senator got arrested." As she was placed in the back of the patrol car, she continued to plead with the police to release her, indicating the arrest would be career-ending for her. Warren's objections were ignored, and she was taken to a nearby hospital where her blood alcohol level was determined to be nearly triple the legal driving limit. In February of 2020, the lawmaker pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor driving while intoxicated. That May, Warren was sentenced to 1 year probation plus 10 days of community service. She declined to seek re-election when her term expired the following January. Number 6. Brent Smith. A physical altercation broke out at the home 46-year-old Brent Smith shared with his mother in DeLand, Florida. On the evening of April the 9th of 2020, Smith's mother reportedly dialed 911 after her son had struck her several times while shouting obscenities at her and threatening to kill her with a butter knife. The man snatched her phone away and was still holding it when officers arrived a short time later. When the victim told law enforcement about what had transpired, they arrested Smith, who was said to have been intoxicated at the time. As shown in the resulting body cam footage, the suspect began arguing with the deputies while being taken into custody and even threatened to hit one of them in the head with a hammer. He then coughed in the officer's direction multiple times while continuing to issue threats of violence. As he was placed in the back seat of the patrol vehicle, Smith could be heard telling an officer, "I hope you die. I hope you catch corona. I hope it latches onto you." He faced a myriad of criminal charges in the aftermath, including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated battery on a person 65 or older, and grand theft, as well as threatening and assaulting a law enforcement officer. He was held without bond at the Volusia County Jail while awaiting the case's next steps. Number 5. Jonisha Lewis. On the morning of September the 22nd of 2021, Texas police initiated a traffic stop in the 2000 block of Kirby Drive in Pearland. An officer reportedly observed a motorist traveling at speeds of up to 48 miles per hour in a posted 20-mile-per-hour school zone. After the policeman informed the driver, identified as Jonisha Lewis, as to why she'd been pulled over, she fled, but was stopped again a short time later. As shown in viral video footage of the incident, the officer tried calming the woman down as she screamed at him for pulling her over for what she deemed to be no reason. Lewis insisted that the police leave her alone, while the officer repeatedly instructed her to put her vehicle in park, but she refused. A second officer subsequently arrived, and for several minutes he and his colleague attempted to get the irate woman to take off her seatbelt and exit the car. It was reported that Lewis was issued with more than 50 different verbal commands, all of which were ignored, and the interaction thus escalated. During the attempted arrest that ensued, law enforcement deployed a taser on the woman, who made a sudden reaching motion towards the backseat of her car. She then continued to scream and protest after she was taken to the ground, while bystanders tried defusing the situation. Lewis was booked at the Brazoria County Jail on charges of evading and resisting arrest. Following her release on bail, Lewis publicly revealed that she was pregnant and lambasted the officer's rough handling of her during the contentious traffic stop. An internal department review led to the determination that the officers had acted within policy, which was reiterated following an independent review by the NAACP. Number 4. Shelby Ailsa Cornelio. Officers from the St. Petersburg Police Department in Florida conducted a traffic stop at 108th Avenue North and 4th Street North in the early hours of May the 17th of 2022. The car that was pulled over was reportedly being operated by 26-year-old Shelby Ailsa Cornelio. The latter, it would later emerge, had been a deputy in the Patrol Operations Bureau of the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office since September of 2018. She allegedly showed obvious signs of intoxication when interacting with St. Petersburg police, much of which was captured on body cam footage that subsequently went viral online. Cornelio not only had the smell of alcohol on her breath, but also displayed many of the common indicators of impairment, including slurred speech, bloodshot eyes, and unsteadiness on her feet. Although she tried to come up with various excuses for her erratic driving and drunkenness, and even tried to use her status as a law enforcement official to get away with it, she ultimately agreed to perform field sobriety tests, which she failed. The deputy also submitted to a breathalyzer test, which determined her alcohol content to be between 0.206 and 0.219. Online booking records revealed that Cornelio was charged with 1 count of driving under the influence with a blood alcohol level of 0.15 or higher. Her employment with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office was immediately terminated following her arrest, in keeping with department policy. Number 3. Alex Wubbles. Nurse Alex Wubbles was arrested while on duty at the University of Utah Hospital's burn unit on July the 26th of 2017. The woman, a former Olympic skier, reportedly worked as a charge nurse, or a liaison between doctors, patients, and hospital managers. On the day in question, Wubbles was overseeing an unconscious patient whom Salt Lake City police officer Jeff Payne wanted to draw blood from as part of an ongoing investigation. Wubbles refused to let him obtain the sample because he didn't have a warrant or meet any of the mandatory criteria needed for taking blood. In response to the nurse's defiance, Officer Payne placed her in handcuffs in the middle of the hospital before forcing her outside and into the back of his patrol car. She remained there for the next 20 minutes, after which she was released without any criminal charges being brought against her. Body cam footage of the incident went viral when it was released later that summer, with the vast majority of viewers siding with Wubbles. As a consequence for his unlawful arrest of the woman, Officer Payne was relieved of duty, while his commanding officer was demoted from lieutenant back down to police officer. The incident led to considerable legislative upheaval, both for the Salt Lake City Police Department and the state of Utah. Lawmakers ultimately passed a bill that clarified consent laws regarding police-ordered blood draws. The police department, meanwhile, changed its policies to require consent or a warrant to draw blood, not just implied consent. In October of 2017, Wubbles and her attorney announced that her lawsuit against Salt Lake City and the University of Utah had been settled for a reported $500,000. Number 2. Wellington protest. In February of 2022, a so-called Freedom Convoy converged in New Zealand's capital city of Wellington to protest the country's stringent COVID protocols. Subsequent reports revealed that the group, which consisted of thousands, were carried by hundreds of cars, trucks, and motorcycles that consequently blocked the roadway outside Parliament as well as other important locations. Law enforcement formed a barricade between the protesters and government buildings, leading to a number of physical clashes amongst the two sides. One such altercation involved a completely naked woman who tried to breach the front line of police officers by diving straight through it. She was predictably restrained by the officers, who then dragged her away by the hair and detained her. Footage of the nude woman's arrest subsequently went viral. More than 120 arrests were conducted during the rowdy demonstrations, with many of the detainees facing charges of trespassing or obstruction. Number 1. Jessica Blick. On December the 14th of 2018, the Cape Coral Police Department in Florida received a 911 call from a woman requesting an ambulance outside a local Family Dollar. Upon arrival in the 500 block of Cape Coral Parkway East, the two responding officers encountered the caller, 37-year-old Jessica Blick, who had a large hunk of concrete in one hand and her cell phone in the other. She declined to give a reason for the phone call or explain why she might be in need of an ambulance. Instead, Blick began walking away from the officers, who tried to get her to drop the piece of concrete. While she simply ignored law enforcement's initial attempts to get the rock out of her hands, the woman became combative after a second officer began approaching her. Blick lifted the concrete in the air and drew it back as though she was about to throw it, while telling one of the officers she was going to kill him. What followed was an altercation that was caught in its entirety by the police's body cameras. Blick ran into the road, at which point one of the officers discharged his taser but missed. It was then that the woman tossed the concrete slab at the second officer as he drew nearer to her, hitting him in the shoulder. The policeman subsequently tackled Blick into some bushes, and although she continued to resist, she was finally cuffed. While being taken into custody, the woman allegedly kicked one of the officers in the thigh and groin. She was taken to Lee Memorial Hospital in Fort Myers, where she was medically cleared, after which she was booked at the Lee County Jail. As a consequence for her outburst, Blick faced charges of aggravated assault and battery on law enforcement officers, as well as resisting arrest with violence. At a retail center in Greenwood, Indiana, a heavily armed gunman shot and killed 3 people, while injuring another 2 on the evening of July the 17th of 2022. The active shooter situation unfolded at around 5:56 p.m. when Jonathan Douglas Sapperman opened fire in the food court at the Greenwood Park Mall. Sapperman reportedly had 2 rifles, a handgun, and more than 100 rounds of ammunition. He fired a total of 24 bullets from one of the weapons. A 30-year-old man was among the 3 fatalities, as were a married couple from Indianapolis. 2 young females suffered injuries as well. Greenwood Police Chief Jim Eisen stated that a bystander at the scene engaged the suspect almost immediately after he started shooting. With his personal revolver drawn, 22-year-old Elisha Dickin shot in Sapperman's direction. The young man also motioned for other mall goers to evacuate behind him. According to the police chief, Dickin fired 10 rounds, 8 of which hit the suspect, who subsequently fell to the ground and died soon after. Upon being handcuffed and interrogated by police, Dickin, who was legally carrying a concealed pistol, had his version of events corroborated by CCTV footage. If a responsibly armed person hadn't taken action within the first 2 minutes of the shooting, many more people would have died. According to Chief Eisen, the latter further praised Dickin's proficient and sound tactics in firing at the perpetrator from a considerable distance, despite having no experience in law enforcement or the military. 20-year-old Sapperman had reportedly lost his job at a warehouse and been evicted from his home leading up to the shooting. According to CBS News, he told his girlfriend before the incident that he wanted to take others with him. Number 15. Corpus Christi homeowner. At approximately 12:50 a.m. on May the 11th of 2020, a suspected burglar was shot to death by a homeowner on North Beach in Corpus Christi, Texas. Residents of the home, located in the 700 block of Snug Harbor Drive, reportedly heard a commotion in an attached part of their house. Upon investigating, they encountered 25-year-old Isaac Galvin and Kieran Rice, aged 22. One of the homeowners opened fire at them and fled in a vehicle driven by 25-year-old Zulma Zepeda Antunes. Galvin was later found dead at a motel on Surfside Boulevard, where his two female accomplices were apprehended. Zepeda Antunes was arrested on an outstanding warrant for past drug charges, while Rice was arrested for burglary of a habitation. Number 14. Franklin, Ohio homeowner. Early on November the 2nd of 2022, 36-year-old Jeffrey Carl was shot in the buttocks after allegedly attempting to burglarize a residence in Franklin, Ohio. A man had just gotten home from the hospital hours prior to when Carl broke into his house, believing no one was home. The victim called 911 after firing his gun, unsure of whether he hit the suspect or not. Franklin police officers were dispatched to the Park Avenue home at around 3:25 a.m. When law enforcement arrived, Carl had already fled on foot and hid inside a neighbor's shed, where he was eventually found by a canine. He was taken to Atrium Medical Center, where his injuries were deemed non-life-threatening. Carl was then transported to the police station and booked on burglary charges. The department's lieutenant said that the suspect was being held in jail in lieu of a $50,000 bond. Number 13. Feng Zhu Chen. A week after 3 armed burglars broke into a Doraville home in Georgia on September the 16th of 2016, the Gwinnett County Police Department released security footage from the incident. Shortly after the suspects entered the house at around 4 a.m., 36-year-old resident Feng Zhu Chen emerged from her bedroom and fired numerous shots at the suspects. In the surveillance video, one of the males jumped through a glass door to escape the deadly shooting, while pieces of drywall were flying all over the residence. 28-year-old Antonio Leaks of Atlanta was shot and hurt, while 2 of the men fled. When law enforcement arrived at the scene located on Spring Drive, they discovered Leaks dead in the driveway. The police department's corporal stated in an interview that Chen exercised her right to defend her livelihood and property. 18 months later, on March the 29th, one of the suspects was taken into custody. 35-year-old Bernard Eugene Little was accused of felony murder and armed robbery. The third suspect remained on the loose. Number 12. Metro PCS worker. On August the 26th of 2019, in southwest Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, an attempted robbery at a Metro PCS store was foiled by the only employee on duty at the time. The incident was captured by the cell phone store's CCTV cameras. As shown in the footage, the robber entered the business when there were no other customers inside. With the firearm in hand, he threw a bag on the counter and demanded money from the worker. The latter made a split-second move to draw his own gun, at which point he shot the hooded man several times. A witness who was in the area at the time told CBS that, out of nowhere, he heard 10 gunshots ring out. Emergency medical services declared the suspect dead at the scene shortly after 4 p.m. The next day, a spokesperson from the homicide unit for the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office said that the shooting was justified and the employee wouldn't be charged as a result. Number 11. Joe Howard Teague, an elderly Californian from the greater Los Angeles area, shot and gravely wounded a burglar after growing frustrated over being the target of several home invasions. According to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, the retired plumber, 93-year-old Joe Howard Teague, turned the tables on a group of home invaders early on June the 29th of 2022. He retrieved his rifle and confronted them inside his Moreno Valley home. Teague approached the burglars and attempted to put them under citizen's arrest. The suspects didn't cooperate, however, as one of them came at him with a fishing pole. The homeowner later claimed that as he attempted to keep the suspects at gunpoint, they started hurling objects at him. At around 12:30 p.m., Teague dialed 911 and reported the break-in. Before deputies responded, a witness reported seeing numerous people fleeing Teague's house on foot. when law enforcement arrived at the Eucalyptus Avenue residence. One of the alleged burglars, Joseph A. Ortega, was suffering from a gunshot wound. The 33-year-old was taken to a hospital where he succumbed to his injuries the following day. Teague, meanwhile, was unharmed. He was escorted to the police station for questioning and was later released. Investigators established that several people, including Ortega, had invaded Teague's property at the time of the shooting. Although it appeared as though the homeowner's decision to open fire was justified, an investigation was launched to confirm. Number 10. Tony Martin. A pair of burglars broke into 54-year-old Tony Martin's farmhouse in Emneth Hungate, Norfolk, England, on the evening of August the 20th of 1999. Martin fired his shotgun 3 times at the intruders, shooting into the pitch black of night. Teenager Fred Barris was hit in the back and both of his legs were wounded. He and 29-year-old Brendan Fearon managed to escape out the window. Fearon made his getaway with 33-year-old Darren Bark, who served as the getaway driver. But Barris succumbed to his gunshot wounds at the scene. At the time of his death, he had a total of 29 convictions under his belt, including 7 for theft and 6 for fraud. He had been given a 2-month sentence in a juvenile offenders facility for theft, assault on a police officer, and rowdy and intoxicated behavior. 3 days after the break-in on August the 23rd, the farmhouse owner was accused of murder, attempted murder, wounding with intent to cause injury, and possessing a firearm with intent to endanger life. He didn't have a valid shotgun certificate, as it had previously been revoked. Martin claimed to have been acting in self-defense, but prosecutors argued he was lying in wait for the pair and had fired from close range without warning. Ultimately, a jury found Martin guilty. He was given a life sentence with a minimum mandatory term of 9 years, which was subsequently reduced to 8 years. On January the 10th of 2000, Fearon and Bark admitted conspiring to burglarize the farmhouse. Bark received a sentence of 2.5 years in prison with an additional 12 months for prior offenses, while Fearon received a 3-year prison term. In 2001, Martin filed an appeal, arguing that his story hadn't been properly presented at trial. His defense team provided documentation of his paranoid personality condition, which was aggravated by despair. They argued that Martin's paranoia was centered primarily around the notion of someone breaking into his home. Furthermore, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. The Court of Appeal accepted the submission, and Martin's murder conviction was commuted to manslaughter with a 5-year sentence. His 10-year sentence for wounding Fearon was lowered to 3 years on the basis of diminished responsibility. Martin was released on July the 28th of 2003, having served the first 3 years of his 5-year sentence. Number 9. Tina Ring and Ashley Lee. Police were called to the Forest Acres liquor store in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on February the 22nd of 2018 after the clerk reported that she'd shot a regular customer who was attempting to rob the place. When officers arrived at the store, located near Memorial Drive and 12th Street, the suspects had already left. He later showed up at a nearby hospital with critical gunshot wounds. Law enforcement identified him as Tyrone Lee, who'd allegedly been involved in 10 other robberies in the area. According to police, the man at the time, in his mid-30s, entered the liquor store brandishing a shotgun and demanding cash. After securing the money, he left, but then returned once more. A glimpse of the incident was captured by surveillance cameras, which showed the store owner, 53-year-old Tina Ring, and her daughter, Ashley Lee, both grab firearms and start shooting at Lee. Having been struck by multiple bullets, the suspect fought Ring for her gun, beating her with a pistol. He managed to escape and Ring suffered a gash to the skull. Lee was indicted on charges of using and discharging a firearm during a crime of violence, possessing an unregistered firearm, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. In January of 2019, the man pleaded guilty to all counts. 4 months later, he was given a sentence of 22 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Number 8. Son of a pizza place employee. Gruesome security footage captured the moment a masked robber was shot in the face by a teenage boy at around 9:30 p.m. on December the 9th of 2021. The incident, which took place at Bold Pizza on Spring Garden Street in Philadelphia, started unfolding when a 33-year-old man entered the pizzeria with the intention of carrying out a robbery. The suspect was standing at the counter and reaching out towards the cash register, which was opened by a female employee. The two struggled as the thief grabbed the money. The employee's 14-year-old son, who was also behind the counter, reached for a gun, pointed it at the robber, and pulled the trigger, striking him at least once in the face at close range. According to the police, the wounded man fled the scene on foot, leaving a blood trail in his wake. 6 ABC reported that when officers arrived at the scene, they came upon the pizza shop in utter disarray, with broken glass, money, and a large amount of blood all over the floor. After following the blood trail, authorities caught up with the suspect, who had cash concealed in his pocket at a nearby subway station. The man was taken to Jefferson Hospital, where his condition was listed as critical. According to investigators, surveillance footage from a CVS on Spring Garden Street confirmed that the suspect, who hadn't been identified, was a member of a group that had just raided the pharmacy 5 minutes before entering the pizzeria. His 2 accomplices were still being sought by police as of the latest updates. Number 7. Reuben Kendrick. On the afternoon of September the 21st of 2015, a man who was robbing a Citizens Bank on Van Dyke Avenue in Warren, Michigan, was shot by a patron. 43-year-old Henry Houston Mann of Ypsilanti entered the bank at approximately 4 p.m. and asked how he could set up direct deposit to his account. When the teller asked him to have a seat, he took out a handgun and pointed it at her. Reuben Kendrick, who was in his early 60s and had just stepped out of the bathroom, was told by Mann to step behind the counter. After Kendrick refused, the man pushed him behind the teller line, demanding money with no hidden die packs. After he was handed the cash, Kendrick, who was a concealed carry license holder, loaded his Smith & Wesson revolver and opened fire at the suspect, hitting him once in each arm and once in one leg. The robber subsequently staggered out of the bank and collapsed to the ground. He was taken to the hospital with non-critical injuries. The following year, Mann was sentenced to 7 years for brandishing a firearm during a crime of violence and 3 years for bank robbery. He was also ordered to pay $1,781 in restitution to the bank. Number 6. Thomas Greer. Upon returning to his Long Beach home at around 9 p.m. on July the 22nd of 2014, California man Thomas Greer encountered 2 people stealing items inside. Subsequent reports revealed it was the 4th time the 80-year-old had been robbed. According to the Long Beach police chief, the 2 suspects, 26-year-old Gus Polly Adams and Andrea Miller, aged 28, punched the homeowner and slammed him to the ground, breaking his collarbone. Adams subsequently attempted to gain access to the victim's safe. Greer was able to sneak into another room to retrieve his pistol. He then went back to the robbers and started shooting at them. When the suspects fled, Greer pursued them outside, continuing to fire in their direction. Miller told him not to shoot because she was pregnant, but she was nevertheless hit twice in the back. She died at the scene. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office later determined that the woman hadn't in fact been pregnant at the time of her death. Greer wasn't charged, as it was concluded that he'd used his legal right to self-defense when he shot and killed the woman. Adams was arrested along with his 52-year-old mother, Ruby, who served as a lookout during the robbery. She pleaded no contest to 1 count of first-degree domestic burglary and received a 3-year prison term. On August the 21st of 2016, her son was sentenced to 12 years in state prison.
She was dead. Well, I shot her twice. She best be dead.
Number 5. Brazilian post office robbery. CCTV footage that was shared on social media on Christmas Eve 2019 showed a man putting a swift end to an attempted armed robbery at a Brazilian post office. Moments before the incident, a customer appeared to be waiting at the counter. Subsequently, a man wearing a black hoodie entered the office, brandishing a gun at the female cashier and pointing his other hand at the register. Within a matter of seconds, the customer pulled out his own gun and fired several rounds directly into the suspect's temple, decisively eliminating the threat. No further details were provided to contextualize the viral clip. Number 4. Alabama man. A burglary in Andalusia, Alabama, was reported to local police on the evening of January the 6th of 2023. Officers responded to the 9th Street residence, but by the time of their arrival, the suspect was gone. The homeowner told law enforcement that while he was sitting in his car outside his house, a man wearing a mask and carrying a gun approached him. According to the victim, the suspect tried to rob him. In response, the homeowner pulled out his own gun and repeatedly shot at the would-be thief, who was later identified as 18-year-old DeAndre Nicholas Sheridan. That same evening, authorities received another call from Andalusia Health regarding a patient with a non-life-threatening gunshot wound, who was subsequently confirmed to be Sheridan. The young man was arrested at the care facility and later booked at the Covington County Jail on a $150,000 bond. He was reportedly charged with first-degree robbery. Number 3. David McLaughlin. 29-year-old David Bailey set off an alarm when he broke into someone's garage in Dunkirk, Indiana, on April the 21st of 2014. The 31-year-old homeowner, identified as David McLaughlin, spotted the suspect and opened fire. Bailey was sprinting down an alley, attempted to flee when one of the bullets struck him in the left arm. In June of the following year, the suspect was given a 3-year home detention term after entering a guilty plea to burglary charges. 10 months later, Bailey sued McLaughlin, seeking compensation for the damages he'd allegedly incurred, which he claimed was well over $100,000. The burglar insisted that he hadn't entered McLaughlin's garage to steal anything. The lawsuit stated that while chasing Bailey down, the homeowner had proceeded to the public road off his property and continued discharging his .45 caliber pistol down the dark alley. Court records indicated that a bullet had hit Bailey in the back of the arm, piercing an artery and inflicting serious and permanent damage. McLaughlin's lawyer told Fox 59 that he didn't often see someone who'd burglarized the home turn around and sue the homeowner for damages, calling the suit outrageous. In September of 2014, a Jay County Superior Court jury found McLaughlin guilty of criminal recklessness. He was given a 60-day jail term and a 4-month home detention period as punishment. Number 2. Craig Cope. A California store owner said it was either him or me after putting a stop to an armed robbery during the early morning hours of July the 31st of 2022. A dark BMW SUV pulled up alongside 80-year-old Craig Cope's liquor store in the city of Norco. The man witnessed 4 armed and masked suspects exit the vehicle and enter the store. Surveillance video showed that just seconds after the group announced their intention to hold the place up, Cope fired his shotgun, striking one of the would-be robbers in the arm. The group subsequently fled the scene. Cope suffered a heart attack and was consequently hospitalized. One of the suspects, 23-year-old Rashid Deshaun Lee Belvin, had a wound consistent with a shotgun blast when authorities later found him at a hospital in Southern California. According to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, the other 3 robbers involved were 22-year-old Justin Johnson, Jamar Williams, aged 27, and 24-year-old Davon Broadus. They were each held in custody on a $500,000 bond. Following his release from the hospital, Belvin was arraigned and ordered to be held on the same bond amount as his co-defendants. They were charged with attempted robbery, possession of a stolen firearm, and elder abuse. Number 1. Ainsley Pacheco. On the evening of October the 4th of 2020, 2 armed intruders broke into the Miami home of 26-year-old OnlyFans star Ainsley Pacheco. Her husband, Daniel Pacheco, was watching the NBA Finals with some friends at around 8 p.m. when the 2 burglars followed a guest inside. After forcing their way into the house, the pair told everyone to get on the ground and began confiscating jewelry from the men in the living room. According to the incident report, Ainsley was in her bedroom at the time. Upon hearing the commotion, she retrieved her firearm and shot at the intruders. She reportedly came face to face with one of the suspects, who told her to put the gun down. She responded saying, "Don't shoot me, my son is in here." After returning Ainsley's fire, the suspects fled the scene. Daniel grabbed the gun from his wife, ran outside, and continued firing at the robbers, who sped off in a dark-colored vehicle. An estimated $100,000 in jewelry was stolen during the home invasion. As of the latest developments, law enforcement was still working to determine if the attack was targeted or random. Thanks for watching. Would you rather fall for a romance scam or have someone steal your identity? Let us know in the comment section below.